Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
2 is Company by TheHumilisScriptor. Luffy, in an act of desperation, manages to save Nami from being separated on Sabaody, and now the Navigator joins him for adventures on Amazon Lily and beyond. Impel Down, Marineford, none are ready for this company of two. Brian McKenzie Warlord, Zach Travis Warlord, Garrick Russell Warlord, Ben Brownlee Warlord, King Nemo Warlord, Tristan Ward Warlord, KSG PL4YZ Warlord. Adios.
Chapter 5. Love is Oil and Water and Rash Decisions. The nation of the Kuja, according to records, had existed for about 500 years. The castle they had constructed mirrored their might and power. Home to centuries of great empresses who ascended to their thrones through strength and capability. The castle was a tall structure with a large stone courtyard in front. The courtyard was accessed through a large oak door, made from a rich green wood that experts have yet to identify. Behind the door was a long catwalk that stretched towards the throne room, where large scarlet pillars lined either side of the walkway. In the room, light purple curtains hung from the walls and ceiling, contrasting with the dark pink carpet that rested on the floor with spectacular grace. Nami was in awe of it all. The palace in Alabasta had been larger and far older, something Nami was sure Robin appreciated, but Alubarna's castle had been quite a clinical structure. It was built for purpose and function, without being overly grandiose, matching the values of the Nefertari family. In contrast, this palace was quite the opposite. The lavish design and winding structure seemed to worship the person within, reflecting a beauty the nation prided itself on and relied upon for its societal function. The building was beautiful, but quite impractical from the logistical perspective of running a nation. Although, Nami wasn't sure any form of governance existed here. The Snake Princess was incompetent at best and, at worst. Well, let's just say, whiny bitch infant with the body of a supermodel came to mind. Nami had watched this warlord parade up and down, observing her gait, facial expressions, and attitude with a keen eye. While Nami didn't like what she saw, as evidenced by her glare, there was something she found quite odd. A sense of familiarity lingered at the edge of her mind, teasing her but never fully revealing itself. That said, these thoughts had not come easily to Nami. The pain from the princess's kick would make the word migraine blush, and although much of it had subsided, her ears still rang. Alongside Kiku's endless bragging about capturing the intruder, which Hancock had acknowledged with a genuine yet lackluster thanks, Nami hadn't had much capacity for thought in the time that had just passed. All of this had culminated in a fierce anger that may have hindered her critical thinking. Nami was fuming. She half wished she had her Klima tact to attack Kiku and the Snake Princess then and there, but alas, she was unarmed and bound. The forced silence wasn't helping her anger either. Nami almost looked forward to the interrogation, just for the chance to speak. "Welcome back, Snake Princess," a mild, soft voice called from nearby, offering a welcome change from the bitchy ambience Nami had been enduring. Hancock turned to regard the woman with a bored, self-absorbed expression, literally looking down on her due to her height. "Thank you for taking care of the palace while I was away." The princess's hesitation was clear. She had forgotten the woman's name. However, the new arrival didn't seem to mind. "My name is Enishida." There was a notable pause, though not an intentional one from the newly introduced woman. "I'm your head servant." Hancock's eyes dawned in realization, a bashful smile crossing her face as she bit down on her lip. I'm sorry." Her stuttering brought the room's occupants to their knees, gazing up at her with sparkling eyes, which elicited a chuckle from the Snake Princess as her expression returned to neutrality. "Oh, Snake Princess, such beauty." Nami sighed to herself, taking the opportunity to mutter, "Definitely an island of lesbians, huh?" Not that she minded. Should make it far easier to escape. The questioning looks she received from Kiku did make her feel better, though just a little bit. Nami focused on Enishida, who rose from her knees holding a small box on a tray. "Snake Princess, I thought you might want to enjoy your spoils of war." So, I polished the finest gem acquired until the shine was just perfect. It is yours, my empress. The bow Enishida gave could have sent her forehead crashing into the floor below, Nami thought. Well, scarcely thought. Her mind was mostly occupied with the box's contents. Hancock opened the lid to reveal the brilliant light of an emerald, its divine countenance resting on a satin pillow. Nami almost screamed. In fact, she did. Treasure? Nami's eyes morphed into belly signs as she thrashed against her restraints, only to be pulled back by an absent-minded Kikyu, who was also staring at the Empress like everyone else. The loving gaze would have made anyone nauseous. Ah! The women crooned, holding their hands together with eyes in the shapes of hearts. The shine of this gem is nothing compared to the beauty of the princess's smile. Silence settled over the room as Hancock picked up the emerald with a delicate move of her hand, regarding it for a moment with a curious, puppy-like expression. Until that silence broke with the snake princess tossing the gem over her shoulder with a snort, leaving a distraught Nami watching in agony as it bounced its way down to the courtyard. In Nami's opinion, Hancock's words seemed to chase angrily after the gem, the navigator already personifying her lost treasure. Please, such a poor decoration is not worth the beauty I exude. The tears pooling in Nami's eyes could not be faked as the convoy was forced to move along. It wasn't long before it stopped again, a strange sight catching the princess's eye. Enishida, what is that? Her question was bizarrely hostile given what Nami was looking at, a statue built in honor of the very woman prattling on and on. Enishida quickly jumped in front of Hancock to explain, a large smile gracing her features. Well, my lady, that is a gift from the village children. They worked extremely hard on it, to the point they even colored it. When I saw them carrying it so carefully into the castle, my heart melted. They looked so sweet, Snake Princess. Like us. They have great love for you, I thought. The smile that spread across Nami's face was soft. The Amazonians, from Belladonna to these children, had proven that some were full of an impossible amount of love and care. Nami wasn't one to judge a group of people by a few actors anyway, but this kingdom was showing its true face through its people. So, this is me, made out of clay? Nami thought Hancock sounded quite mystified from her tone and was happy to see that the woman wasn't completely without compassion. She was more than done dealing with evil warlords at this point. Yes, my lady. I would be very careful touching it, it's very. The last words caught in Enishida's mouth as Hancock pressed her palm to the clay statue, sending it crashing into the ground, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Nami had been mistaken. It wasn't mystique she had sensed in the woman's voice but abhorrent disbelief. Hancock's words grated against the feelings the statue had conjured earlier, the cold water like shock sending a wave of anger through the navigator. Do not bring such worthless items before me again. And clean up this mess at once. The snake princess took off down the hallway, and all Nami could do was stare, the conclusions she had been reaching washing away in her storm-like anger. You ungrateful bitch. Her words came out quieter than she would have liked, though understandable given the strike she had taken earlier. Kikyu kicked her in the back for her troubles, anger rippling through the black-haired city defender along with something else. Mind your tongue, East Blue Girl. You may have proved your strength at the prison, but I will remove your tongue if necessary. Her words came out as a swift order accompanied by a glare the navigator could not interpret. Nami sighed, grudgingly following the command and snapping her jaw shut. The convoy moved slowly behind Hancock, careful not to interrupt or disturb the snake princess in any way. At the end of the hallway sat a potty. Hancock's snake, which Nami had been keeping a cautious eye on for a while, slithered expertly onto the stand before twisting and curling to form the shape of a throne. From that point, it seemed content to remain in that arrangement, even as Hancock approached and sat upon it with a blazing yet bored attitude. Enishida, fetch me some Hikashu, now. Her command was met with an instant response as a servant ran off, while Hancock folded one leg over the other and settled to relax. Nami was forced to her knees by Kikyu, in what she considered the most pleasant movement against her since her capture. The restraint Kikyu was displaying was interesting. The woman turned to look up at Hancock. Excuse me, Snake Princess. Kikyu seemed nervous, even timid, something Nami had not yet heard in her voice. She was quite enjoying this new version of the woman, if only because it was a nice change of pace. The warlord opened one eye in annoyance to regard what she now saw as an interruption. Yes, Kiku. I was, under the assumption that you wished to interrogate the prisoner? She proved herself quite strong and could reveal vulnerabilities in our defenses. The city defender gestured to Nami, and the navigator had to restrain herself from biting the woman's finger off, despite the odd compliment she had given. It's not like she wouldn't have deserved it. Hancock emitted a mixture of a scoff and a seed, flicking her head back in a way that allowed her hair to tousle across the back of her snake throne. I plan to do so when I am thoroughly comfortable. The snide comment still sent the servant swooning, gushing over her beauty and wisdom. Nami was stunned by the behavior she had seen so far, but the princess's routine and that of the women had grown old enough to force an eye roll. Looking at Enishida, Hancock glared with a stiff expression. I said I wanted some hikashu. The head servant nodded nervously, looking around for the servant who had run off. Another voice cut in, echoing across the room and capturing everyone's attention. I think you'll have sayame as well. The Straw Hat Pirate turned around to see a familiar, short old woman. She recognized her as the one who had outed Luffy as a man. Had the other women called her Elder Nyan? The muttering of her name across the room confirmed Nami's recollection in a matter of seconds. But while the women in the room seemed reverent, Hancock merely sighed, leaning further back into her chair. If that was even possible, and giving the old woman a lazy glare. What do you want, you old crone? If you recall correctly, this is my room. Why are you here? The grin that crossed Nyan's face was devious, and Nami's opinion of the old woman was improving. After all, if anyone could make this annoying diva that annoyed, they must be one brilliant customer. Cyan'd I come and see my beloved princess? Hancock, by all standards, was not amused. She sat up with a deadly expression, not even regarding Nyan with her gaze. Remove her from my sight, immediately. Though the guards hesitated, the old woman spoke before they could even hope to restrain her. Quite frankly, Nami liked this woman's style. Wait, Hancock. A scoff rang through the room. It's Snake Princess. If Hancock wasn't a warlord, Nami would have made a greater attempt to throttle her at that moment. Self-preservation notwithstanding, it wasn't the restraints that restrained Nami's vigor. She couldn't quite explain it, but something was familiar. Since she couldn't quite put her finger on it, Nami assumed it was simply another feeling of anger at seeing yet another stuck-up warlord. Hancock's correction elicited a growl from the old woman, who finally conceded with a cough and a low bow. Excuse me, Snake Princess. Nami thought Hancock seemed to enjoy torturing the woman, judging by the way she smiled. There, now isn't that better? The old woman didn't share any positive feeling towards the outcome, instead standing back up with a firm grip on her snake staff, her eyes dancing with a passionate fire. There's a government ship anchored in the waters near here, isn't there? You have been ordered to assemble as part of your arrangement, and the ship is there to escort you, is it not? Hancock seemed to be half listening before nodding in confirmation. Yes, it is an invitation to war. Nami tried to make sense of the dialogue. From what she could tell, the world government was ordering Hancock to war as part of her warlord status. But war against whom? Had she missed something since Sabaody? Had something happened? Thoughts of Eni's lobby raged through her mind, recalling their own declaration of war. Was the rest of the crew all right? The worry in the pit of her stomach was making it hard to think. But why did you not go then? You must go with them. Nyan seemed to plead, and frankly, Nami had been wondering that herself. It was a bit strange to see a warlord refuse the world government in such a manner. Hell, even Crocodile had been forced to at least make an effort to pretend. As long as you cooperate, the treaty will be upheld. And with your powers, your life would never be in danger. The logical reasoning seemed to fall on deaf ears as Hancock instead pouted, holding her hand to her mouth, eyes wide and brows furrowed. But I'm so scared. The entire room seemed to swoon, even Elder Nyan, with hearts visible in the older woman's eyes. Oh, she looks like a puppy. Nami would have face palmed if her hands were free, but luckily, Elder Nyan snapped out of it, stamping her snake staff against the marble floor. Nope, I can not falter Nio. The short elder took a deep breath before regaining her composure. Listen, Snake Princess, your status as a wirelord protects this country. Long ago, the calm belt was our greatest defiance, protecting us from foreign invaders. But now, the government has developed new technology that allows their ships to cross the sea. Losing your status would be the worst possible outcome for this country. By the end of her rant, her yelling had started to hurt Nami's ears. But all Hancock could do was roll her eyes and take a sip of the drink that had finally been delivered. It seems to me that you are the only one who is afraid here. I am ready to die at any moment, Nyan said with a scoff, befitting of a woman her age and of her liveliness as she pulled a crystal ball from the arm of her coat. But that does not apply to the children on this island. See there F8 princess, through my MYAGICAL 200% accurate FYORTUNE telling. 200% accurate? How would that even work? Nami's sarcastic thought was cut off by Elder Nyan's dancing and chanting as she moved around the ball, seemingly calling on the old spirits of Amazon Lily to reveal the future. For a moment, both the navigator and the snake princess wore identical annoyed expressions as the old woman danced with more fervor around her crystal ball. With a flash of ink dotted on the glass surface, Nyan turned around and revealed her prophecy. You see, Gayat Gyoing, the old woman gestured towards the message on the crystal ball, words that read, move it. The entire room fell silent as Nami stared deadpan, though she at least appreciated the old bat's sentiment. Hancock was less amused. Such insolence. Her yell practically shook the walls as she shot up from her snake throne, throwing her glass aside and shattering it into hundreds of pieces. Restrain her at once. This time, the guards did not hesitate, grabbing Elder Nyan by the arms and lifting her off the floor, despite her pleas. With a determined gait, the warlord walked toward Elder Nyan, a bored glare of disgust on her face. Who do you think you are? The snake princess made sure to flip her hair back once more. Your era came to end a long time ago, Gloriosa. Nyan seemed to pale at her former name, and Nami couldn't help but wonder about the history behind it. What exactly was the relationship between Nyan and the snake princess? 4 decades ago, you left the island to chase your desires and this kingdom is mine. Hancock straightened her back and, in what Nami thought was ridiculous to the point of being nearly funny, looked so far down on Nyan that she ended up looking upwards instead. You betrayed the Kuja. You betrayed this nation. You surrendered your title and authority as a result. Hancock lifted Nyan by her hair, the old woman thrashing in pain and a desire to escape, but still shouting back at the warlord. And that is why I live in a secluded corner of the village, to hide my shawl OWWW. Nyan let out a yell as Hancock lifted her higher before slamming her to the ground, storming towards the window while dragging the elder behind her. Then perhaps you should have stayed there. The smirk on Hancock's face made Nami seethe with unmitigated anger. You see, Gloriosa, I shall always be forgiven for my misdeeds. I can kick puppies and kittens, and I can throw an old woman like you out the window. I could even destroy this kingdom and all its people through my decision, and I would be forgiven for it. And do you know why? Right by the window, Hancock pulled Nyan high enough so that they could engage in level eye contact, all for the sake of the old woman's torment. Nami, meanwhile, shook with anger at the display, lost in her own memories. Read my lips, Gloriosa. Because I am beautiful. Bullshit. Hancock turned on her feet in surprise at the voice, as if it were a trick of the air and not real. But lo and behold, Nami was glaring at her with deep, sated anger. Kikyu attempted to demand an apology from her amidst the displeased jeers and shouts of the servants. But all Nami could do was focus on Hancock. The snake princess took a step back in shock, dropping Nyan, who scrambled away to safety. I beg your pardon? Hancock asked, eyes wide, fists slowly clenching as her brain began to process everything. But all Nami did was grit her teeth further, and as we know, once the navigator got fired up, she rarely backed down. Bullshit. Her yell reduced everyone in the room to stunned silence, to the point one could hear the pin drop. You're sacrificing a kingdom for what? Because you're too lazy to get off your ass? Get your priorities straight. Hancock began to walk slowly towards Nami, but the orange-haired woman didn't seem to care, continuing to give the snake princess a piece of her mind. Leaders are supposed to protect their people. It's not some whimsical thing. It's the very purpose of your existence. I can't just sit around and do nothing. As royalty, it's important that I protect my people with everything I have." The memories enraged Nami further, to the point that her teeth could have cracked and shattered right then and there. "I knew a Princess Who taught me all that once, and she is 1,000 times more beautiful than you could ever try to be." Hancock was gritting her teeth now, enamel grinding together as her fists clenched to the point that they could draw blood. No one in the room could tell who was angrier, Nami or Hancock. No one could bring themselves to protest the verbal onslaught. The words were simply too shocking. Nami lost herself further in memory and fervor. "Authority is something you wear over your clothes. There is no such thing as a naked king. So, I thank you now as a citizen and as a father. Thank you. And maybe if you let a little air out that balloon you call a brain, you'd realize that Elder Nyan is right, and that she'd probably make a better leader than you any day of the week. After all, leaving a country is nothing compared to allowing the children of this nation to die. Your Zhu." The slap that Nami received might as well have echoed across the entire island, to the point where Kikyu even winced at the thought of the pain that must have shot through Nami's cheek. Anyone with a hint of observation could tell that the Snake Princess had poured a lot of hockey into that strike. Hancock stood angrily above the navigator, casting a shadow as Nami, who had yet to turn her head, seethed in agony while blood dripped to the floor. "Know your place, peasant." Hancock could barely get the words out, picking Nami up by the throat as she glared, shaking in what everyone assumed was anger. But as the navigator turned her head to glare venomously into Hancock's eyes, she saw it. It didn't erase her anger. No chance at that. But Nami saw into Hancock's eyes all the same. For a brief moment, reaching a state of clarity in all her observations. Nami saw fear. It was small and faded quickly, both with Nami's anger and hatred for the woman, as well as the general pain of being choked. But it stunned the navigator enough that Hancock faced no resistance as she spoke. "I was going to interrogate you later this afternoon, but now you've gotten me quite angry. As soon as I've changed into some new clothes, you will tell me why you are on this island, or else you shall be fed to the Sea Kings." Nami didn't reply, continuing her glare as she basked in her dislike for the warlord while processing what she had seen. It was like looking into a mirror that saw into the past, a reflection of someone else Nami once knew, or rather, had once pretended to be. "Kikyu," Hancock turned to the city defender with a confident smile, "keep this peasant guarded in the corner. I shall return shortly." With a lazy flick of her wrist, the Snake Princess practically threw Nami backward into Kikyu's waiting arms, which twisted Nami's arms painfully behind her back, enough to elicit a wince from the Straw Hat Pirate. Kikyu nodded towards the fleeing warlord with respect. "It will be done, my lady." With a final bow from Kikyu, Nami was led to the corner of the room and thrown into it like a bag of rubbish. Collapsing in a heap on the floor, all the navigator could think about was her rage and what she had seen. Seeing Hancock so callously throw away the lives of everyone on her island had set Nami off, especially considering everything Vivi and her father had gone through for Alabasta. The humility and grace they had shown. All of it. Hancock had completely disregarded everything Vivi stood for. And since Vivi was Nami's first female friend, well, that was something the navigator couldn't stand for. Besides, perhaps more importantly, the idea that Hancock would condemn every child and innocent on the island was simply disgusting. And yet, Nami couldn't shake the fear she had seen in the warlord's eyes. It had been so familiar, so like her own when Nami had needed to wear a mask. When Nami had nothing but her trauma to guide her. And perhaps it still guided her, somewhat, in the form of scars. But those scars were so etched into her skin that Nami could see them on someone else without fail. Hancock wore a mask, just as she had. And while that didn't excuse her actions, even in that world without hope, Nami would never have condemned the villagers of Kokoyashi like that. Nami thought that maybe there was more to the warlord than met the eye. The navigator still thought the Snake Princess was a bitch, though Nami had to silence the quiet voice in her head that fondly stated she was a bitch as well. Nami looked down at the snakes that served as her handcuffs and growled. They itched like nothing else, and the slap Hancock had given her still stung to the point it felt as if she had just been slapped. It had only been 4 minutes, and Nami couldn't stand it any longer. Though with Kikyu talking to other servants, she was at least being left alone. Nyan had wisely disappeared, and the relief Nami felt at the old woman escaping unscathed was palpable. While, yes, the navigator was in a huge amount of trouble, she felt satisfied that she had aided the elderly woman to some degree. However, despite this positive thought, Nami still groaned. How the hell was she going to get out of this? Her Klima tact was with Luffy, and she was bound by her hands, by an unconventional method no less. If they were normal handcuffs, she could easily break free, but snakes? She had never dealt with that before. Speaking of, she also had to fig past Hancock's pet snake, which had been left to guard her. Damn it! How long was Luffy going to take? Once he got here, he could easily beat up the guards, and then he'd walk up to her with that wide, goofy grin of his and say, "Hey Nami." Nami jumped in shock, her head whipping around to see her captain crouching right beside her with that big, stupid grin of his. The one that always made Nami smile in response. If she could raise a hand to her numb face, she would know it had done exactly that. "What you doing over here?" Luffy tilted his head like a puppy, confused about how Nami had ended up in the situation she was in. "Luffy, you're here," Nami began, until a confused thought struck her. "Wait, where's Hancock's snake?" The look of confusion she received in response would have made her laugh if her face didn't hurt. It didn't take long for Luffy's eyes to widen in realization. "Oh, that snake thingy. Yeah, I kicked its ass after I climbed up here. You should have seen, Nami, I was really sneaky like Usopp, so I managed to get all the way up here." The captain picked his nose, and Nami rolled her eyes in a moment of disgusted fondness. "Oh, just get me out of here." Luffy easily removed her bindings, and as the navigator tried to stand, she instead tumbled back onto her ass, head spinning. She had been hit one too many times, it seemed. Through her blurred vision, she saw Luffy staring at her with a furrowed brow, and Nami felt the need to explain. "I think you'll need to carry me." "Huh? How come?" he inquired, eyes narrowed as he tried to figure out if Nami was attempting to scam him and put him further in debt. As Nami turned her head to show him the impact of Hancock's slap and the blood it had drawn, Luffy's expression hardened into steel. "Who did that to you?" His whisper was angry, and Nami could tell he had been restraining a shout. He raised a hand to inspect her face further, and the navigator obliged, ignoring the slight sting it caused. Regardless, they couldn't waste time with Luffy getting angry. They needed to get the hell out of here. Perhaps they could hijack that marine ship? It doesn't matter, Luffy, she's gone. Kiku didn't help, though. Nami gestured with her head toward the city defender before another thought occurred to her. "Wait, where's my Klima tact?" Luffy blinked at her for a moment, calming down slightly as he slapped a hand to his waist, the familiar clink of her Klima tact catching Nami's gaze. Luffy wore it on his waist, just as she did, and Nami fought back the blush that wanted to emerge on her cheeks. Luffy complimented the crew often, but the subtle things he did made Nami even more elated. Such as noticing the exact way she held her Klima tact and mirroring it perfectly. Nami took the weapon eagerly, however, preferring it to be at her own side. As she did so, she made her intentions clear to the rubber man. "Alright, pick me up, and let's get go." Gum pistol. Nami sighed before looking up in inevitable dread as she spied the Kiku-shaped hole in the far wall. Luffy's fist retracting to his side as he glared. "If any of you hurt my navigator again, there'll be more where that came from." At this point, Nami would take the victory of Kiku getting some justice. Luffy was likely going to cause a ruckus anyway. All the other servants stared in both horror and amazement at the spot where Kiku had been, as well as at Luffy himself. "Would you just get me out of here already?" Nami chided in a tutting voice, an edge of panic in her tone, as Luffy sprang into action. The Straw Hat Captain picked Nami up swiftly, making her dizzy given her injured state, and ran out of the room. Violent and vitriolic shouts thundered behind them as they dashed through the corridor. As her vision cleared somewhat, Nami spied an approaching T-junction with worry, given Luffy's sense of direction. Go right, go right." Luffy let out a hum. "You're right or my right?" A fist lightly crashed into the top of his head. "They're the same, right, idiot?" Nodding in understanding, Luffy pushed off the wall at the last second to retain his speed, heading right as Nami had instructed. With the sound of footsteps echoing behind them, Luffy darted around another corner to hastily ascend the steps. Nami practically had to grab her captain by the ear to correct him. "No, Luffy, go down, down." She tugged on his earlobe for emphasis, but all Luffy did was look at her before winking. That's what they'll be expecting. Nami let go of his ear, which snapped back and made his head briefly wobble. Once we're high up, we can find a way to sneak over the wall and out of the village, instead of running through the streets and getting caught again. Nami gawped, staring at him with a gaze of suspicion that was half faked. Who are you, and what have you done with my blissfully scatterbrained captain? A pout emerged on his rubbery face as he mirrored Nami from earlier that day. Meanie, Nami chortled as they ascended another flight. The sound of footsteps had grown much quieter, confirming that they had not been followed. In fact, the sound of a bell made Nami think their absence was being investigated, but no matter, they were pretty much in the clear. Luffy reached the final flight of stairs, arriving at the top floor and slowing to a walk. He glanced around the corridor with an owlish expression before turning to Nami with what was an attempt at a thoughtful expression. We need a place to hide for a while. Somewhere they won't suspect. Before Nami could quip at the look on his face, Luffy's eyes landed on a large blue door. A smile now gracing his lips as he approached. Perfect, he nodded to Nami as he gently pushed on the door. However, the sound of two voices around the corner made them balk, and they quickly shut the door quietly behind them. After waiting a moment, the captain and navigator sighed in relief when no one else entered the room. Taking a moment to turn around and properly take in their surroundings, Nami noticed the thin steam and the temperature. The sound of running water and the sauna-like properties of the room were actually quite soothing for her headache, enough that she gestured for Luffy to put her down. Her captain obliged, lowering Nami to a standing position on the wet floor. His voice emerged in a half-whisper, which he had obviously tried to make a full whisper but failed, because, well, he was Luffy. I think we're safe now. Nami nodded in confirmation as Luffy walked further from the door, his curiosity taking over as he passed through the small, light blue tiled archway that led to the source of heat, water, and steam. Nami, basking in the comfort of the room's atmosphere, peered at him in an attempt to get him to stay still. Luffy. What are yo? Marigold? Sandersonia? Is that you? The familiar voice reached the navigator's ears from the foggy area, causing Luffy to take a step back in shock. And, because of course he did, Luffy's foot slammed down onto a bar of soap, which quickly slipped out from under his sole across the floor. Attempting to right himself, Luffy tumbled ungracefully forward, failing in the process and grabbing Nami's forearm for support. The navigator hadn't expected him to do so, and she was sent tumbling after him, the two crashing down into some shallow, soapy water. After pulling their heads from the water, the two looked up and paled. Confirming what Nami had heard, a tall, slender woman stood in the middle of the watery area. She was just as shocked as they were. Her head tilted back slightly to gaze at them, her bare back on full display. Water glistened off the large red mark that stood out against her beauty, and it didn't take long for Hancock to come to terms with what had just happened. Her secret now revealed, the warlord's eyes narrowed with venom as she swung around in pure, unmitigated anger. Shielding her chest from the eyes of her new enemies, she quickly submerged herself in deeper water to hide her body. You saw it. Her voice emerged as a hiss, fittingly like that of a snake, that it wouldn't be shocking if she shed her skin right there and revealed herself as a cobra. Nami was quick to recover, clearly doing so before Luffy, who was likely still trying to figure out what was going on. What? We didn't see anything, did we, Luffy? The navigator couldn't stop the awkward, sheepish chuckle that escaped her lips, but she received no response from her captain. Nami looked down at the Straw Hat captain and saw that he was peering right at Hancock with unblinking eyes. The orange-haired woman adopted a look of confusion. What the hell was wrong with him? But Luffy just stayed exactly where he was, a perplexed expression lining his features as he kept his gaze fixed. Nami tried once again to salvage the situation. We didn't see anything, right, Luffy? Once again, she was ignored. Hancock's glare could have frozen every inch of water there as she shuffled further away, the silence now dominating the room's atmosphere. Until Luffy decided to break it, of course. Hey lady, you got a really weird rash on your back. Have you seen a doctor about that? Nami's eyes went as wide as dinner plates. In fact, so did Hancock's. Nami could have burst out laughing, tears streaming down her face, as it reminded her of the shock she'd felt when Luffy punched Laboon's eye. But she was used to the idiot's antics by now. Acting quickly upon seeing the angry vein appear on the warlord's forehead, Nami picked Luffy up out of the water and tried to drag him toward the door. But it seemed Hancock's shock had turned into righteous fury by now. Sandersonia, Marigold, her bellow was akin to that of a banshee, and the door burst open instantly. Two large women emerged, and their sheer size alone would prevent Luffy and Nami from escaping through the door. Nami released Luffy, realizing the effort was futile, and the captain's head hit the floor with a dull thunk. Meanie Nami. The groan that emerged from his lips didn't amuse Nami this time, however. Not now Luffy. Her claim attack quickly assembled in her grasp, but the two sisters were far faster than her. The green-haired woman kicked forward, her size allowing her to reach Nami with little movement, sending the blue staff clattering against the wall. The hostility towards Nami caused Luffy to burst to his feet, but he was quickly restrained by the orange-haired woman. His arms were held in place as a large snake emerged from what felt like the shadows almost instantly, wrapping around Luffy's rubber legs and trapping him. Nami followed shortly, the green-haired woman holding her as if she were about to be sacrificed on an altar by Hancock. The Snake Princess, now wearing a bathrobe of pure white, stepped forward in unabated fury. "You dare!" Luffy squirmed, protesting as he thrashed about on the floor. "We just saw your back. What's the big deal? We would rather die than reveal the secret that lies on our backs, and that secret is one that you two will now take to the grave." Hancock held her hands forward in an odd shape, a pink light emerging between them in the form of a heart-shaped ray that enveloped both Luffy and Nami. "Mero mero mellow. Nami, watch out. It's a slow beam." Luffy's yell was thoughtful, if not painfully stupid, as Nami groaned in exhaustion, looking at her captain and almost forgetting about the attack. It had been a long day after all. "Luffy, it's not that you dolt." Her anger was well placed, given Luffy's thrashing movements on the floor had slowed to an almost comic fashion, his attempts to stand now hindered by what he assumed was Foxy's attack. N-O-N-A-M-I-M-G-O-I-N-G-S-L-O-W. His voice was highly exaggerated as Nami grit her teeth at the sight of her captain acting like a complete dunce before she began yelling profanities at him. The two were so caught up in their usual spiel that they didn't notice Hancock's confused face, practically stone itself. Why aren't you two, stone?" Her voice cut through the play-acting of the two Straw Hats, who blinked once before turning to the warlord in confusion. "Stone?" The duo was in complete unison, right down to the head tilt that Luffy normally performed when he didn't understand something. Hancock shook with rage before noticing something far more distressing. Sandersonia, her brave sister who never faltered, was sweating nervously. Hancock saw that her sister's eyes were wide, and her breaths were coming in rasps, and she raised a brow. "Sandersonia, is something wrong?" Her question was nervous, causing her sister to nod and stagger slightly, almost releasing Nami. "The woman, she appears to be resistant to you." Sandersonia looked down at her older sister, careful not to appear as though she were looking down on her, ensuring her expression was full of humility. Her desires, they very well could be suppressed by her rage. But she may possess some dormant haki. Hancock's brow furrowed deeper. The use of haki to counteract the effects of devil fruits, especially one like hers, was an extremely advanced technique. For someone to pull it off by accident, they must possess great will and luck. And within the girl, she could sense a willpower of great strength. Marigold, however, seemed even more perturbed with her own prisoner. "The man, his resistance to your devil fruit was not through any haki." At that, the Snake Princess fell utterly silent. Here she had two people who could resist her charms, resist her power. The girl, well, that sort of haki usage was a threat, but the man? She didn't even want to think about it. "Call the guards," Hancock said firmly, glaring at the two in front of her. "Tell them to take these rats down to the Colosseum. I believe it is time our people received some entertainment." The two sisters nodded, yelling down the hallway. Shortly after, a group of warriors took hold of Luffy and Nami with harsh grips, dragging them away. Nami concluded that dignity was to be found in defeat. "Luffy, not so much. You assholes, let go of me, I'm gonna kick your ass. You hear me?" His shouts weren't deterred by the guards' attempts to silence him, though Nami herself made no protests. Instead, she was lost in thought, taking the opportunity to rest, given the events of her day. What the fuck is hockey? It was an hour later when the two Straw Hats found themselves dragged helplessly up a stone flight of stairs. Luffy honestly relieved that something was finally happening. The guards, who had been their previous escorts, roughly flung them onto the main stone platform at the center of a pit of spikes before leaving them there. The two were still bound and tied by snakes that had wrapped themselves around their arms. High above on a distant, raised podium sat Boa Hancock, resting on her beloved snake with a tension in her body that hadn't existed the last time she'd done so. Regardless, she was still enjoying the misery of her new enemies, reveling in the loud cheers of the crowd directed at her. This, however, did not stop her mind from wandering. The boy. He had resisted her without hockey. A fact so evidently clear to her, given that the girl herself had used that particular method at the same time. Her happy smiles slowly faded, shadows gathering at her feet as the world around her began to fade. Her distress, however, was noticed by Marigold, whose brow furrowed in concern. "Sister, what's wrong?" the large woman asked, though she regretted it as soon as she glanced at Hancock properly. She knew what was wrong, and it had been foolish of her to ask. Fear ruled her black-haired sister more than anything else. It did so for all of them, but Hancock was the one who took it most to heart. "You all are nothing if not for your beauty, and, if not for me." Both Hancock and Marigold tortured themselves over the same memories and could only watch the two prisoners interact to abate the tide of darkness in their minds. "Great idea, Luffy." Nami's voice was angry, understandably so, before it shifted to a surprisingly accurate impression of her captain, if not slightly more nasal. "Oh yeah, Nami. LCE. What could possibly go wrong, if not everything? Oh, never mind, I never think ahead, sorry again, Nami." Luffy's face took on a shark-like appearance as he bit back, capping off his retort with an outstretched tongue. "Hey, you were the one who agreed with me, you meanie. You're the one who is supposed to think ahead for me." It hadn't even been a second on the platform before Nami and Luffy had started bickering. Though the situation was dire, the navigator was happy to be reunited with her captain. She deliberately sighed with anger to mask her small smile, one that, realistically, Luffy likely knew she was making given the way he chuckled fondly. They may be captured by one of the 7 warlords, but they were together, and that was something the two would never allow to change. "I'm sorry I got you stuck in this mess." Luffy's voice was surprisingly subdued, his head downcast as he glanced at Nami with a soft frown, one that the navigator knew was apologizing for more than just Amazon Lily. Nami's face softened, knowing he must have been holding that in for a while. She and Luffy knew each other well, perhaps better than anyone else. Anyone who said Luffy had doubts would be a liar and didn't know him at all. He just didn't focus on them, always looking ahead and lighting the way for everyone around him. It was telling how much the recent days had impacted him that he would look back, if only briefly. It wasn't about himself, though that was likely an element as he questioned his strength. Of course he would, even if he didn't need to. But Nami knew it was mainly about herself and the others. And how they felt, even though deep down, Luffy knew how she felt. Sometimes, well, he needed a navigator to steer him back on course and remind him. "Idiot." She scoffed so fondly that she would have laughed at herself if she could. "If getting into messes was enough to drive me away, we wouldn't have left Orange Town." And with that, the bright smile on Luffy's face returned as he roared with laughter, eliciting a warm feeling in her stomach. The two exchanged a mental high five, given that their hands and feet were bound. From far above, in one of the stand's higher rows, Margaret watched with interest. Her head ached with memories that refused to leave. "Margaret, nice to meet ya. My name's Luffy. It matters not. The man is a danger to our princess and the island, it is our duty to destroy them." Confusion filled Margaret, conflicting thoughts and emotions clashing like a storm in her head. On one hand, Nami had betrayed them, and Luffy was a man. They had injured Kiku and Sweet Pea. All were grounds for her hatred and contempt, right? But Nami had shown her soul through her eyes, both in her friendship and genuine regret, and Luffy, he had trusted her. Even when she had intended to kill him, he had shown her gratitude instead. Someone with the power of a king lowered himself to that of a humble pirate and thanked her with infinite sincerity. This execution, it didn't feel right. Margaret. The voice beside her was weak but still filled with a willpower she greatly admired. The Snake Princess does not know about your involvement in bringing the man into the village. All the villagers present have been sworn to secrecy. Kiku was wrapped in bandages, her jaw in some kind of brace due to how hard Luffy had struck her. However, she showed little contempt for the strikes against her. On Amazon Lily, strength was respected, even if it came from a traitorous woman and a man. In fact, Kiku was having her own internal debate, one that was causing more turmoil than her injuries ever could. Thank you, Kiku. Kiku managed a small smile, though it was hindered by her injury. Do not thank me. I would hate for someone who I thought of as a sister to get punished. Kiku. Margaret. At the sound of the call, the two Kuja turned to the approaching Sweet Pea and Aphalandra, making sure there was enough space on the bench for them to sit. How are you, Kiku? Aphalandra asked as she sat between them, looking at her friend's injuries with evident worry on her face. Kiku rolled her eyes but managed a small smile once again. I am fine, thank you, Aphalandra. Belladonna said I would recover in a week or so. The saga of, you have endured a lot of punishment. Sweet Pea cut in, sitting next to Margaret while looking at the black-haired city defender. Silence reigned over the group for a moment as they worried about how Kiku would react. But Kiku just nodded slowly, turning back to the center of the arena. Speaking of, Margaret's expression turned sad, still remembering the kindness of both Nami and Luffy. The arena quickly went silent upon Hancock standing up, gazing at their snake princess, as well as at the prisoners, in an entranced manner. Now, let me ask you, man, Hancock bellowed for the entire stadium to hear, casually disregarding Nami's glare at her lack of inclusion. How, and for what purpose, did you come to my island? Luffy blinked for a moment, not to buy himself time to think about his answer, since he didn't think when he opened his mouth anyway. I'm not really sure how I got here either. 1 second, I'm fighting this Paw man, the next, I'm here on this weird island. A sneer escaped Hancock's lips. Liar. He's not lying. You should know better than anyone about your colleague. Come. Nami couldn't finish as Hancock's words and well-placed glare cut her off. Good little girls should speak only when spoken to. Nami glared back in defiance. You must have a purpose for being here, correct? The Snake Princess's eyes shifted to Luffy, who blinked owlishly as if to say, me? In the ensuing silence, he eventually figured out he was being asked a question. Oh, right. Well, if it's a purpose you want, then, I want a ship. Nami would have winced at the crowd's outrage if she wasn't already getting used to this weird island by now, while Luffy continued to speak despite their reactions. I need to get out of here and find my crew as quickly as possible, and if you could give me that, I'd be really grateful. Liar. The crowd's outrage grew louder, as others chimed in with protests over Hancock being referred to as, you, and of the man's ignorance in general. In response to all this, Margaret felt her hands clench, recalling her own memories to find the truth. Well, I'd better go get some soon then, but first, I need to head back to your village. I need my navigator. I'm pretty much useless without Nami. He's telling the truth, Margaret whispered, which Kiku caught, the black-haired woman staring at her in shock. How insolent, Hancock's yell filled the stadium. You do not have the right to order me to do anything. You will never leave this island alive. At that, Margaret couldn't stand to hear it any longer. With her body acting on its own, she stood up, and Kiku attempted to stop her with a meek protest that was uncommon for her. Please, Snake Princess. Wait. Her call garnered everyone's attention, the arena falling silent as even Luffy and Nami stared in shock. Especially when Margaret leapt from the stands into the arena, turning to face Hancock. They aren't lying. Margaret's yell was shy yet full of passion as she stared up at her idol. The crowd began to mutter as Margaret knelt on the floor, bowing her head in supplication. Please, Snake Princess. I know these two. They mean this kingdom no harm. They are not that kind of people. The crowd was taken aback, while Nami and Luffy simply beamed at the blonde-haired woman. Nami felt tears forming in her eyes at the sign of Margaret's forgiveness, though not enough to start falling. Still, they voiced their agreement without fail. Yeah, she's right. We don't mean any harm, not to you or this island. We just want to go home. Hancock looked toward Margaret with an expression of cynicism. "Are you not one of the city defenders?" Her voice was curt as she stared down, and Margaret nodded in response with a respectful expression. "My na princess." Margaret remained on her knees, both unwilling and unable to rise. "The moment that man entered our country, where men are forbidden, his death was certain. Why do you plead for his life? Why do you defend two who you have been commanded to kill?" Hancock's doubtful glare hurt Margaret more than any physical injury, and she sighed, beginning to shake. "Snake Princess, I feel responsible. The reason he found our village was because I led him here." Margaret's explanation was nervously delivered, and the crowd gasped, murmuring among themselves at the revelation. Sweet Pea and Aphilandra moved to spring to their feet, but someone else held them down, albeit lightly due to physical incapacity. And with a weakened step and jump, Kiku stood before Luffy and Nami, then knelt beside Luffy, and Hancock couldn't hide their shock, but it was Nami whose eyes widened in disbelief. To see someone she regarded with contempt, who felt the same towards her, stand before her left Nami's mind racing in confusion. "Snake Princess, I hold just as much guilt as Margaret. It was I who failed to capture the man. It was I who did not act on my suspicions of the girl. And it was I who chose to hide both the man's breach of the island and Margaret's actions from you." Kiku's words came forward through grit teeth. An admission of guilt, especially from someone as devoted as her, was never easy. Yet, it was a testament to her true character that she knelt just as Margaret did, her forehead hitting the floor, eyes wrenching shut in pain, her fist clenching. "And yet, I also cannot help but think of these two as those worthy of my respect. Despite their crimes, my heart and mind cannot help it. They have shown their strength, Snake Princess, and I cannot." Kiku had thrown herself into the fire at this point, struggling to verbalize her inner thoughts and feelings. Taking a deep breath, she looked directly into Hancock's eyes with a pleading expression. For Margaret's sake, and for the sake of the two behind her. They fought with strength for one another. Was that not what she did for Margaret to cover her guilt? Was that not a founding principle of their island? And if Margaret was willing to lay down her life for the two, then how could Kiku deny Margaret the trust she had always given her? Why would she start doubting Margaret now? Nami, meanwhile, continued to stare at the black-haired woman, her opinions shifting as she listened to her words. "I ask that you recognize their character through the strength I have seen, Snake Princess, and recognize Margaret's innocence in bringing the man to the village." Hancock paused for a moment, taken aback by the speech. Kiku was one of her most loyal followers, without fault, and yet. No, it was as it always was. The warlord gritted her teeth in utter fury, her face shadowed by her hair as she gestured to Nami. And her? What of the woman? Nami merely growled, having finally found her voice after Kiku's passionate plea. "I found the village on my own. These two have nothing to do with my infiltration, even their supposed failures." Both Kiku and Margaret turned their heads slightly to look at the navigator in shock, but the orange-haired woman could only adopt a cat-like grin before winking at them. Luffy laughed at the entire exchange, looking at the two Kuja with a smile that, in its purity, simply confirmed what they had expressed to Hancock. "Guess you two were nice after all." His grin practically exuded light, and the two women managed to smile at him, Kiku doing so after his continued words. "Sorry for punching you. But hey, you're pretty strong." Hancock did not share in this joy, moving forward in the silence of the crowd. Every step she took echoed throughout the arena, as if earthquakes were nipping at her heels. Nami and Luffy watched nervously as her descent finally ended when she reached the bottom of the staircase. The Snake Princess approached her two Kuja warriors calmly. Margaret was a bundle of nerves, while Kiku kept her head bowed in reverence. Hancock placed gentle hands under both Margaret's and Kiku's chins, the latter wincing due to her prior jaw injury, as the warlord looked them both in the eyes. "Margaret, Kiku. Your honesty and loyalty is evident." Hancock's voice was sweet, accompanied by a sweeter smile. And Margaret felt a blush worm its way onto her cheeks as she stared into the dark blue eyes of her princess. Kiku, however, was, for once, not enamored, merely accepting what was about to happen. "Tell me, you two, do you want forgiveness?" Margaret's head perked up as she stuttered her shy reply, while Kiku remained silent, her head bowed in complete credence. "Why, yes." Nami and Luffy watched the scene with relief, though the former had a bad feeling in her stomach. That look in Hancock's eyes. The fear. Nami recognized it as once her own, and her stomach twisted in worry. Something wasn't right. Stand up. Hancock commanded sweetly, and the two Kuja obeyed instantly. Luffy smiled widely, while Nami's eyes widened in horror as she looked into Hancock's. She knew. Luffy, not having paid attention to Hancock, widened his eyes as he saw the warlord's hands twist into that familiar shape from before. Wait. Nami was unable to finish, as Hancock had already shot forth that heart-shaped ray at the two Kuja warriors. One horrified, the other passive. Mero Mello, and in the blink of an eye, both Margaret and Kiku had been reduced to stone. The crowd gasped, and both Sweet Pea and Aphilandra sobbed openly. Kiku had spared them, looking after them as always. And now, she and Margaret were gone. Never to be talked to, hugged, or smiled at again. Luffy and Nami's reactions were different from those of the crowd. What the, oh, you fucking bitch. Luffy instantly whipped his head toward Nami's angry face, while Hancock simply turned around, ignoring them both as she made her way back to her personal seat with a sense of joy. Hey, Hancock reached the staircase. Hey, now, she ascended the steps. Hey, the Snake Princess stopped, turning to look down at Luffy, whose face matched the fury of his navigators. Hey, why did you do that to them? Punishment for aiding you, for failure, and for disloyalty, Hancock replied as if she were asked about the weather, flicking her hair to fall upon her back casually. Luffy's eyes widened considerably as he stuttered in disbelief. Because of me, if it's our fault, let us take the blame, turn them back to normal. Nami's bellow was angry as Hancock sat back down upon Salome, who bore a large bump on his head courtesy of the rubber man, who was now the one shouting. Turn them back to normal. Luffy was blinded by rage at this point, and Hancock glared back at the man and his navigator with equal venom. Who do you think you are, ordering me around? Enough of this. Hancock had reached her limit. Bring forth Bakura. I thought I told you to turn them back. Luffy's yell filled the arena once again, enough to make one or two crowd members shift uncomfortably in fear. Hancock, however, ignored him once again and reached down to grab something from the floor. This is the island of Amazon Lily, Hancock drawled, throwing the object she had grasped at Nami's feet. Where if you are strong, you are beautiful. Kiku died in the name of your strength, so let us find out if she died for nothing. Nami looked at the Kleem attack that had been thrown to her, and, on cue, the snakes that had been binding the two straw hats slithered away, finally allowing them to stand. But all Nami could do was think of Hancock's words as she picked up her weather staff, gripping it tightly in her clenched fists. Kiku, she had died believing in Nami, respecting a strength Nami wasn't even sure was there. But if Kiku could die believing in her, why shouldn't she be able to believe in herself? The navigator's expression hardened as a giant panther entered the ring, accompanied by Hancock's explanation, but Nami didn't listen at them to stone, so there might be a way to turn them back again. Nami glared up at the Snake Empress with pure aggression in her eyes, hating everything. Because she recognized the distorted mirror that was Boa Hancock and how far the warlord had fallen. She hated the sympathy that wormed its way into her heart, despite the woman's actions. She hated looking at Hancock and seeing everything she suspected she had once hated about herself. Nami did not know what had set the black-haired Kuja leader on the path she found herself on. She couldn't even begin to imagine. But she hated the woman's weakness. Perhaps that was also a reflection of the anger toward her own weakness she had felt under Arlong, and the shape of that weakness now. Lesser and different, but still present. Because she hated looking at this stupid, stuck-up diva princess and being reminded of what her life might have been without Monkey D. Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates. And so, Nami didn't flinch. She was terrified of Bakura and wanted to cower and hide. But more than her fear, she had faith. Something she knew Hancock did not have. Perhaps had never possessed. But Nami had faith in her captain. Faith that he would destroy this stupid panther and anyone else. And she wouldn't back down this time. So, as Luffy shouted and Bakura approached, Nami held her ground, glaring up at Hancock, who almost recoiled under her gaze. She could hear the crowd laughing and jeering, but it was barely a muted sound, and the orange-haired woman felt righteous anger flood through her system. Perhaps Luffy felt similarly, as his straw hat landed on her head before he turned and slugged Bakura in the face, sending the cat flying. She knew the action was not one of comfort, because this time, it almost felt like acknowledgement, or perhaps. Yeah. Luffy was proud of her. Nami blushed at the idea, both for conscious and subconscious reasons, because perhaps this was his way of saying she was worthy to wear the straw hat. And that felt like fire in Nami's veins. The loud howl that echoed throughout the arena snapped Nami from her fervor as the panther flew to the left and crashed into the stone stands with an almighty crunch. Spectators jumped away from the large cat, then turned to the two pirates at the center of the arena in surprise, to the point that some began to shake. All eyes in the stadium watched Luffy and Nami, mostly focusing on the former since he was the one who had just punched the giant panther. But some also noted the latter's lack of outward fear. Luffy looked at every single member of the crowd, a furious expression lining his features. There's something wrong with all of you. Your friends have just been turned to stone by that woman. Why are you all laughing like children? The crowd, stunned for a moment, quickly broke out into yells. The savage is shouting at us. What an unbelievably barbaric creature. We feel sorry for those two, but there's nothing wrong with what the Snake Princess did. They were wrong for their acts of treason. And you call me the savage, Luffy muttered, subdued in his anger, a billow of smoke blowing from his nostrils. You guys are really, Nami sighed, before her face broke out into a small, fond smile. Hypocritical? Yeah, that one. Hancock chuckled at Luffy's protests, which garnered both his and Nami's attention. It seemed the Snake Princess wished to impart some wisdom upon them. No matter what I do, I will always be forgiven. Do you wish to know the reason? No, Hancock ignored them. Indeed, it is, because I am beautiful. The crowd of Kuja warriors, with the exception of the still distraught Sweet Pea and Aphalandra, immediately began to swoon, swaying from side to side with hearts in their eyes. Hancock looked down at both Luffy and Nami with a seductive grin. You think so too, right? Hancock asked them both, as Luffy looked up at her with a glare. God, you piss me off. The crowd stared at Luffy's reaction in utter shock as Hancock played it off, dramatically fainting onto her snake throne and groaning in an almost fake agony. This man cannot be swayed by my charms. Hancock's question was meant to elicit a reaction, but all Luffy and Nami did was continue to glare at her. An unfamiliar feeling ran up her spine as the truth was laid bare. Neither of them preened, neither swooned. They both just looked at her with honest hatred. Honest, Luffy walked forward slightly and stopped next to the determined Nami, and Hancock felt something stir in her stomach. A twinge of rage surged as Luffy gave Nami a small glance before continuing his glare. These two, they were ready to go down fighting together, that much was evident by their battle stances. Something about their close relationship irked Hancock. I cannot bear this man to exist. Hancock's murmur emerged as a painful whisper. It was Elder Nyan, however, who watched while trapped in her own memory. So many times, she had seen this. You idiot, why do I have to be the one to patch you up after you charged headfirst into danger? Again. Mind you, I should leave you to die on this split island, you split brain. Bawahahaha. I've been kicking a lot of ass though, haven't I? Oh, hey Gloriosa, fancy seeing you her. Pow, bang, crash. You idiot. No one is supposed to know we're here. Mr. Pirate Kings are smart. Wow, to think we'd run into some old woman in the middle of the comm belt. Smack. Ow. That's the least I'll do. You have 5 seconds before I arrest you properly this time. And once, she had experienced it herself, so very long ago. A fist collided with a head. You idiot, I should throttle you to death? I have half a right mind to join Newgate in his spiels against your supposed authority. You utter bit. I mean, meanie. I should kill you right here and now. No, don't hit me. Nyan shook her head and sighed. Love is always oil and water, and never a hurricane, eh? The sad smile in memory of her own past was present but noticed by none. All she could do was watch these two at the center of the ring and remember the best times as a result. Meanwhile, Hancock pointed forward and gave her command. Sandersonia. Marigold. Take their heads. Her yell filled the arena as the two larger women leapt high into the air towards the two Straw Hat Pirates, obeying without question. With a gentle tap, The two snake sisters landed right in front of Nami and Luffy. "Worry not, sister," the two chorused in unison. "We shall deal with this disrespectful man." The two sisters were just as keen to kill the man as their sister. After all, they knew what his lack of attraction was doing to her. To make their sister feel safe, to make her feel in control, they would do anything. And thus, the two began to change. Nami could only blink in disbelief as Sandersonia's skin brightened, morphing into a sickening green color. Marigold also changed, transforming into a tone far paler than she had been before. Their teeth quickly transformed into fangs, sharp and as long as swords. Where there had been legs, now there were large tails, which slowly moved to encircle the two pirates. The crowd roared in excitement, chanting the word, "Execute," like a pack of rabid hounds hunting for quarry. "Huh, looks like they've got devil fruit powers too." Luffy's comment was as useful as it was obvious, and Nami rolled her eyes, drowning her nervousness with the feeling of the hat on her head. "No, you think?" Her sarcasm was easily recognized by the captain as the snakes continued to encircle them, Nami allowing a forced smile to cross her face. She would not panic, not now. "Any ideas?" Luffy just shrugged in a remarkably simple action. "Nope. I never think this far ahead. But we've gotten this far, so, kick ass and ask questions later?" Nami spun her clean attack with a cat-like grin as she looked at their opponents. Better not to ask at all. This was the first step in getting stronger. For Luffy, and quite frankly, for herself. For her crew. For Kiku and Margara, lightning sparking at the end of the clean attack and a rubbery body stretching in an attempt to limber up. Hancock smiled sinisterly, raising her hand as the whole crowd roared in excitement. Begin, Chapter 6. Bad Habit Sharing, Execute. The word filled Luffy's ears completely as he stood in the arena's center with Nami, the chant of death reverberating from the stands like a drumbeat. The two snake sisters towered above the two straw hats, their snake forms clearly threatening, despite Luffy not being personally intimidated. Sandersonia and Marigold were laughing to the point it almost drowned out the noise of the crowd, just waiting for the two prisoners to make the first move. "Do you think I should swallow them whole?" Sandersonia suggested, her tongue hissing through her maw, while Marigold merely shook her head disapprovingly. "As if you could believe I would leave much to eat after I strangle them to death," the orange-haired serpent smirked at the sight of Luffy remaining still, interpreting his stance as a sign of fear, until Luffy began to speak. "Hey, can we wait a second?" His request was casual, as if he were asking to borrow a pen. The two snake sisters, of course, misinterpreted his request. "You can't beg your way out of this, you fool!" Her jeer emerged alongside a chuckle, a cruel tone that reflected her absolute intent to kill on behalf of her sister. If nothing else, Luffy could at least respect that her desire to kill him was her own, and not something she was being forced to do. Still, the rubberman had more important priorities. "It's not that," Luffy tried to explain, turning around to walk towards the two statues as the eyes of the two snakes widened. "I just want to get these two out of the way first." Marigold fumed in response. "How dare," her voice was subdued at first before it emerged as a yell. The Kuja sister grasped her spear in rage with a flourish. "How dare you turn your back on me?" The giant king cobra swung the mighty blade towards Luffy's retreating neck, only for the weapon's metal to be blocked and struck by a crackling ball of electricity. Thunderball. Electricity discharged through the spear until it reached Marigold's left arm to ground itself, halting her attack as she recoiled in pain with a scream. Sandersonia's tail whipped out instantly, catching her sister before she could hit the floor. Golden eyes peered in rage at the orange-haired navigator, who twirled her clean attack with a smirk. "You girls better stay out of this." Nami stuck out her tongue and pulled down her left eyelid as Luffy approached the two stone statues. The glares she received from the snake sisters did nothing but fuel Nami, widening her smirk in mockery. "Fool," Sandersonia spat, mocking the navigator's confidence. "You honestly believe that you can defeat us?" "Ya got that right." Nami clicked her fingers in a gesture towards the green-haired sister, her face brimming with cheeky confidence. The navigator, mostly distracting them so Luffy could relocate the two statues, turned around, relieved to see that her captain had placed them quickly but gently on one of the lower levels. The two were placed in a standing position, and the Straw Hat Captain looked at them with subdued contemplation for a moment. "I'll fix this, you two. I promise," and with that, Luffy jumped atop the platform to reach the primary arena once again, a wide smile spreading across his face. "Right, now they're safe, I can focus on kicking your asses." His statement did nothing but incense the crowd, who, after a brief moment of stunned silence, burst into hysterical laughter, their amusement palpable. Nami couldn't help but frown at the sound, noticing the same laughter coming from the two Snake Sisters as well. These Kuja women were painfully arrogant, and that was going to come back to bite them. Kikyu had been arrogant, and she had learned her lesson. Once again, Nami twirled her klima tact with a determined expression as she thought of the Kuja warrior who had stood up for her. No matter what, Nami was going to see both her and Margaret cured. Luffy, on the other hand, was confused by the laughter his statement had elicited. I can do that, right?" His question was innocent and a reflection of his genuine confusion, and Marigold's laughter was further incensed. "Of course you can," her bellow echoed to the far ends of the arena, causing the crowd to cheer once she had finished speaking. "If you haven't lost the will to live." Luffy just fished for bogeys in his nose, shrugging, as he didn't really give Marigold's bluster the time of day. "Nah, I won't die yet. I still gotta find the One Piece." This merely elicited louder laughter from the two sisters. "You, finding the One Piece?" Sandersonia giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. "Wow, men really are funny, aren't they?" Before Nami could fire back a response to their words, feeling moderately incensed on behalf of her captain, Luffy was already shouting, "Shut up, I am gonna beat you guys. I am gonna get Nami and me out of here, and then, I am gonna be king of the pirates." Whether they interpreted it as bravery or stupidity, the two sisters were momentarily stunned, staring at the man's resolve with partially widened eyes before they regained their composure, likely sensing the crowd's restlessness. "Well then, Pirate King, I warn you and your friend. You two better not end this execution early by falling into the spikes below." Marigold's announcement was merely met with bored, disinterested nods from the two Straw Hats. And from high above on her throne, Boa Hancock finally reached the point of boredom. And that would not do. "Marigold!" Her voice echoed from behind the two serpents, forcing them to stand at attention instinctively. "I grow impatient, kill them already." Marigold grinned widely, shaking her shoulder for a moment to limber up before gripping her polearm with renewed tightness. "It will be done, sister." Hancock, satisfied with the response, leaned further back into her snake chair. Oh, she was going to enjoy this. Marigold spun her spear, causing a brief billowing wind to form before striking the ground hard where Luffy stood. The Straw Hat Captain leapt away from the blow, landing swiftly back on the arena floor like a spring. Marigold spun her spear once again to deliver 5 consecutive slicing blows in Luffy's direction, who rolled, leapt, and crouched to avoid each one in what almost looked like a dance. "Take that, and this?" Marigold's yell between each of her strikes was futile, as Luffy dodged each stroke of her blade, though not exactly easily. For one of the blade's strikes, he narrowly missed the polearm, some strands of hair falling to the ground as the captain narrowed his eyes at the sight. The final strike of Marigold's blade was avoided with a leap into the air, Luffy vaulting over the Snake Sister's head in a simple acrobatic movement. Marigold turned to keep an eye on him, gripping her polearm tighter as she realized the prisoner wasn't entirely incompetent. "Not bad, little man." Meanwhile, Sandersonia had also begun her attack on Nami. The large serpent brought her fist down onto the navigator, who quickly rolled out of the way. The ground shook lightly from the force, and Nami balked for a moment before stealing her resolve. From what she could tell, the sisters were tough, unnaturally so, given they were devil fruit users. She would need to come up with something far more powerful than usual if she was going to help take them down. But in the meantime, she needed a way to defend herself. She thought back to when she had deflected Eneru's attack, but that had been lightning. Could she replicate that for a physical attack? Nami tugged at her collar briefly, the humid air of Amazon Lily doing her no favors in helping her think. Nami wouldn't know unless she tried, as Sandersonia looked at the sparking Kleem attacked with a mocking expression. "You think you can defend yourself with such a pathetic spark?" Nami smirked. "I don't know, let's find out." With that, she twirled her Kleem attacked in a fluid and graceful arc. Thunderballs erupted from the staff's end, leaving streaks of light in their wake as Nami grabbed the other two parts of the staff tightly. In air shimmered with heat as the navigator released several heat balls around her person, warming the rising currents that collided with the cool balls she released in a similar fashion. The two currents of air collided, the cyclone tempo forming around her like a cage and whipping the air into a whirlwind, her orange hair dancing in the force of the wind. The tension from the electric particles of her thunderballs swirling around her faster and faster set her skin alight, given how attuned she was to the weather. The mist around her ionized, tiny sparks flickering in and out of existence. Sandersonia recklessly launched another attack since Nami was no longer moving, her fist careening through the air as Nami thrust the final part of her cleam attack forward, driving the thunderballs into the swirling winds. The lightning within surged, crackling against the ground and air like a living creature as Sandersonia slammed her fist into the storm Nami had created around herself. Thunder Cage. The serpent screamed as the electrical winds burned and cut into her arm, the force of the cyclone throwing her arm and body backwards. She hadn't predicted the attack any more than Nami, who hadn't known what would happen when she struck it. The storm dissipated, Sandersonia's screams of pain echoing as the crowd watched in awe. Nami smiled as she tried to calm the painful tingling in her skin from her close proximity to the storm, having practically cast herself into a thundercloud. Nami threw one of the cleam attack's pieces above her head, and as it returned, she slammed the other two pieces on either side, reassembling the weapon into its staff form. Sandersonia, though taken aback by the attack, seemed mostly fine, if slightly in pain, and Nami knew she needed something far more powerful. Sandersonia would be more cautious now, which should buy her time for something else. Once again, the humid air blistered against Nami's skin, and for a moment, she almost missed what was a brilliant thought. Now that was an idea. Luffy flew behind Marigold, who turned around to face him before pursing her lips and launching a strange purple spit toward the soaring captain. A rubbery hand shot down toward the railing, pulling Luffy out of the way just in time, as the substance had nearly struck his head. Poison? Luffy muttered in annoyance, recalling Crocodile's poison and how much of a pain it had been to deal with. I better be more careful. Marigold merely smirked in confidence, ignoring what was going on with Sandersonia and the girl as she focused on the man. One of the deadliest poisons in the world. Oh well, too bad for you. Another blob of poisonous spit flew towards Luffy, forcing the captain to dodge once again, leaping backwards as he twisted around the purple substance. Luffy growled, growing annoyed at being forced to constantly dodge. Man, you're lame. Can't you do anything else? With that, Luffy dodged another blob, strafing to avoid it as he flipped onto his hands, his feet clapping together as they shot right at Marigold. The snake simply held up her palm to block, smirking as the attack careened towards her. Gum Gum Spear. The attack bounced off Marigold's palm as Luffy bucked, his eyes widening in shock as he was blasted backwards, ricocheting from the force. Marigold's tail lashed out, slamming Luffy into the ground as he flew backwards, the rubber man coming to a stop against the railing as he clutched his stomach. Ow! His groan was audible to the audience, who laughed at the sight. That hurt, hang on, that hurt. But, I'm made of rubber, that shouldn't have hurt. Before all that, Nami prepared one of her more powerful strikes, positioning the thundercloud as she rolled out of the way of Sandersonia's fist. As she came to a stop, Nami stood upright, smirking as a fist flew in her direction. This time, with deft hands and greater understanding, Nami formed her defensive technique once again, Thunder Cage. Nami's confident smile quickly vanished as Sandersonia's tail breached the cage and smacked her right in the face, drawing blood as Nami flew backwards, the winds breaking apart upon Sandersonia's attack striking her jaw. Blood poured from her lips, but Nami didn't have time to question how the hell that had happened. She twisted the cleam attack as planned now that the snake sister was exposed. A lightning strike from my left, the cloud she had left sparked, and Nami smiled, not processing what Sandersonia had said until it was too late. Now, Thunder Lance tempo. Sandersonia dodged with her eyes closed, while the navigator processed what had occurred, her eyes as wide as dinner plates. Nami glanced toward Luffy and saw him rolling on the ground, whining in pain from Marigold's blunt attack. What the hell is going on? That shouldn't have hurt Luffy. And to break through my thunder cage, plus, The way she dodged my Thunderlance temple like that, it's familiar. Nami was lost in thought, briefly losing track of Sandersonia. Just what kind of powers do these two possess? A shadow loomed over her, and Nami's eyes widened as she moved her clean attack in response. But perhaps she was too late. Goodbye. With that, Sandersonia's fist crashed down onto the navigator. On the other side of the arena, Marigold struck down with her polearm once again. Luffy rolled out of the way before jumping upwards, soaring high into the sky as he tried to figure out what had just happened to him. Did I lose my rubber powers or something? He pulled his cheeks to check, and lo and behold, they stretched under the force. Luffy mumbled in confusion. Guess not. Then, why did their attacks hurt me? Shrugging, Luffy prepared himself for the next round of fighting until a tail lashed out at him from behind, wrapping around him and holding him in place. Come on Mari, I want to play with the man too. The girl over there ran out of tricks. Sandersonia's hiss rang in Luffy's ears as he struggled, his eyes turning toward the sight of Nami's body lying on the ground in a crumpled heap. His eyes widened in horror. She wasn't moving. Enraged, Luffy pushed against Sandersonia's tail with more force, and though he freed himself somewhat, he was still trapped. Nami. No response. Nami, get up. Luffy now turned his rage to Sandersonia, given Nami's body was still lying there unmoving. He had freed his arms, even though his legs were still trapped, and his fists clenched in fury. Gum Gatling. The multitude of fists blasted in Sandersonia's direction as the woman smirked and squeezed her tail even tighter around his legs. Luffy's arms fell short of their target as the rubber man let out an ear-splitting scream, a sound that made some members of the crowd recoil as it combined with the rumbling from above the arena. It hurts. Why does it hurt? Luffy continued to scream, confused and in pain. This feeling, it felt so familiar, but where? Ashigara Dakoi shove. Tha axe guy. Luffy barely choked out, remembering the events at Sabaody. The one fr on the AR Kai Pelago, he was Lee Ktha too. It's no Tia de VL Fruit? Another yell emerged from his lips as the air whirled around the arena, Sandersonia squeezing her tail tighter. Luffy felt a weariness that hadn't been present before, his mind growing unfocused from the pain. He felt like his legs were going to snap any second. The sight of Nami on the floor snapped him out of his pain. Take good care of her, boy, is Ed. His struggle slowly twisted back into rage as he glared at Sandersonia, who lowered her tail so the rubber man could look her in the eye. You hurt no am I? Sandersonia scoffed. She was an easy kill. Her taunt caused Luffy's eyes to narrow into pinpricks as his teeth slammed together in anger. It was disappointing as well. I thought she displayed hockey earlier, that she was the bigger threat. But it turns out she was pathetic. Just like you. Few can master the power, and it seems neither of you are among that few. That is why you are weak. Luffy panted. The air around him, it was so hot? The extremely moist air was nearly unbearable, and Luffy had to shake his head to clear it. Left fist. Sandersonia's murmur preceded Luffy's punch toward her head, the captain's eyes widening in surprise as the snake preemptively dodged. She predicted my attack? Luffy was lifted further into the air by Sandersonia's tail before her words cut through the unbearably hot, moist air. Snake drop. The tail plummeted downward, smashing Luffy into the floor with a horrendously loud crash. The stadium erupted into cheers when the dust cleared, and Luffy could be seen lying in a crater on the floor, bruised and broken. But the man staggered to his feet, briefly tipping to one side before righting himself. No matter how bad he felt, it was good to be out of Sandersonia's grasp. The sight of Nami on the ground steeled his resolve as his foot slammed into the ground, propelling him toward his navigator in a sprint. However, he was quickly intercepted by the familiar, large green serpent. Not so fast, Sandersonia sing-songed, and Luffy scowled in return as his hands curled into fists. Out of my way! Luffy's command tore through the air, and upon noticing that she did not, in fact, move, the rubber man leapt into the air. Now, Gum Gatling. His roar accompanied his barrage of fists, which flew through the hot, steam-filled air towards Sandersonia, who simply chuckled in response. Snake dance. Her calm words mirrored her movements, which flowed like a dance, weaving her between each strike from his Gatling. The snake mocked and jeered, amused by the man's efforts. "You're far too easy to read. I've already grasped your movements." It reached the point where the snake placed her arms behind her head, eliciting a seething anger from the Straw Hat Captain as he attacked with renewed vigor. "Better be careful," the voice hissed from behind him, and Luffy's eyes widened far too late. Marigold's tail impacted his stomach with a sickening crunch. Snake stick. Luffy rolled backwards on the ground, disoriented and dizzy from the ordeal. Opening his eyes with a groan, he spied Margaret and Kiku below him, the rubber man likely to collide with them. Shit. His curse was soft but determined as he kicked off the wall, avoiding damaging his two new friends. A smile graced his face, though not for long, as two tails raced toward him in perfect unison. Twin snake tail slam. Their chorus was all Luffy heard before the pain of their impact took over his thoughts. Closing his eyes, Luffy attempted to gasp for air but found the unbearable, worsening heat made it hard to breathe. This pain, it was like nothing he had ever felt. Nami and Garp had struck him before for stupidity and training, and while those punches hurt, they didn't hurt like the strikes of the Snake Sisters. Luffy slowly fell toward the spikes the strike had sent him flying into, willing his body to move as he refused to give up. But his body struggled to respond as the spikes drew closer. And now, Katatumbo strike. The sound of Nami's voice was quickly drowned out by the loudest and most horrific thunderclap Luffy had ever heard, perhaps only surpassed by the strike he'd heard in Logia Town. But hearing Nami's voice, even briefly, was enough for his body to kick into action. Luffy's arms stretched toward the railing, and he pulled himself back to the arena to see exactly what was going on. The cloud above was awesomely horrifying in Luffy's opinion, with a red tint that shot forth endless bolts of lightning in a continuous pattern. One or two bolts struck him, but he didn't even notice, simply staring at the beautiful light show before him with wide, odd eyes. The Snake Sisters, caught in the center, screamed as they were barraged by endless bolts of lightning. It wasn't just one strike, it was a continuous stream that wouldn't end, tearing through their bodies in a manner they had never experienced before. Even their haki was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of strikes. The crowd, of course, was terrified, most of them never having seen anything like that before. The static electricity in the air and their worry for the Snake Sisters understandably made most of them scream. Alas, the attack eventually died down, leaving the two Snake Sisters at the center of the now blackened area, charred and sparking with latent electricity. Nami appeared from her invisible state, but Luffy. It was almost as if he had known she was there, leaning on the railing next to him. The captain turned to her with a massive smile as Marigold and Sandersonia fell to lean on their hands, Hancock shouting words that neither bothered to hear. Nami. Luffy's beam accompanied his vaulting over the railing as he wrapped his arms around his navigator and pressed her into his chest. "I thought that snake woman hurt you for sure." Nami blushed slightly at the embrace, though she couldn't begin to comprehend why. Regardless, she offered a grin in return. "Come on, Luffy, did you forget that I can make mirages?" Luffy tilted his head, pouting as he tried to come up with an excuse. "No, I just didn't remember." Nami laughed as he released her before patting him on the head fondly. "Yeah, that's called forgetting, numbskull." "Meanie. But it doesn't matter. We're together now, and that's how we'll stand a better chance. My Katatumbo strike is great for a new move, maybe my best one yet, but there wasn't enough moisture in the air to sustain it as long as I wanted, and it takes way too long to set up. We'll need a different strategy." Hancock, meanwhile, stared at the two, enraged. That attack, she had never seen anything like it. A storm, in the calm belt, and localized to the arena. No less. That girl, she didn't know what kind of power she had, but she had underestimated her. Even without haki, she could dish out dangerous attacks, given that Marigold and Sandersonia were still struggling to get upright. The Snake Princess had no doubts the two would recover. Her sisters were tough, and Zone Devil Fruits enhanced one's durability and recovery. She wasn't worried. One attack that couldn't be accomplished again was of no concern to her or her sisters. Slipping into a state of greater confidence, Hancock felt the need to rebuke their chatter. Impossible. The two pirates turned to see her smiling from her high pedestal, her sapphire eyes twinkling with amusement. "You two are all talk. A man with a paramecia and a witch with a magic staff. How amusing I find your confidence." What she didn't expect, however, was Luffy's angry response. "You're the witch here." His bellow practically made her collapse against Salome, as the woman once again gasped in disbelief. Hancock could practically hear the man's teeth grinding from where she sat, and her subjects responded in outrage. "He insulted the princess again, unforgivable. Silence him, Marigold. Kill him, Sandersonia." Only 3 Kuja remained silent. One was Elder Nyan, and the other 2 were Sweet Pea and Aphilandra. All 3 watched as Luffy endlessly rebuked the Snake Princess and protected Margaret and Kikyu despite their stone states. The 2 city defenders, in particular, quivered with emotion, a newfound feeling of gratitude toward Luffy and Nami growing in their hearts. Kikyu and Margaret were all the 2 had, and they weren't ready to say goodbye. Hancock did not share such sentiments. "Sonia. Mari. End this man's life already." Her thundering roar showcased the strength of her anger, the 2 Snake sisters having recovered, though they still seemed somewhat shaken. "So, I don't have to hear," Luffy and Nami glared at the warlord. His filthy talk again. The crowd roared in agreement, cries for blood pouring from their lips. Sandersonia looked at Nami with an intrigued yet mocking expression. "It seems you can't pull off that attack again. It was our mistake in letting our guard down, but rest assured, it won't happen again. We were going to have fun with you, but after that, we'll gladly expedite our sister's orders. Playtime is over." Marigold announced, arm tighter as Sandersonia flicked her head in agreement. They had underestimated the woman and paid the price. It was time to take her out of the equation before she did something else unexpected. Sandersonia's tail slithered over the edge of the arena, wrapping around an object. With a simple movement, Margaret's stone form was pulled toward Sandersonia. "Hey, what are you doing?" Luffy yelled in anger as Margaret was shaken like a rattle at the end of a tail. Nami had quick, similar protests, her voice rising several octaves in panic. "Put her down. She saved my life. Put her down, now." The Straw Hat Captain didn't understand why the 2 were doing this. Margaret had nothing to do with their fight, after all. The green-haired Snake sister turned to Luffy with a grin, tossing Margaret up once before catching her. "Then, I'll break her." "If she saved your life, she's a criminal too," Marigold confirmed, smiling villainously at the 2 pirates. Their threat to their sister's well-being could not be tolerated any longer, and they would suffer for it. Sandersonia shared similar sentiments. "Too bad for her really. But it's your fault it must be this way. Stop screwing with me." Luffy's shout accompanied his sprint towards Sandersonia. "This fight is between you and me, not her." Unfortunately, Luffy was intercepted by Marigold, who struck him backward with her tail. The captain gripped his jaw in pain as he fell onto the charred, tiled floor. "Luffy!" Nami's yell was full of concern as she ran towards her captain, only to feel Marigold's tail coil around her, lifting her into the air. The navigator squirmed as Luffy managed to get to his feet, with Marigold retreating before he could realize what was happening. The 2 Snake sisters stood on either side of the arena, with Luffy at the center. "Nami!" Luffy instantly turned toward the side of his navigator, who intended to shout a reply before Marigold's tail coiled tighter around her. A horrified scream erupted from the orange-haired girl's mouth, a sound Luffy had heard only a few times, but never so prevalent or clear. The captain shivered, ready to sprint toward Nami until Sandersonia interrupted him by tapping the stone of Margaret with her finger. Let go of them." Luffy's yell was filled with anger, but hints of desperation were beginning to break through his tone. Sandersonia chuckled in response. "Come on, Straw Hat, you can only save one of them." Her taunt was cruel, perhaps unnecessarily so, but all bets were off when it came to the marks on their backs. "So, will it be the navigator you so desperately wish to escape with, or the warrior who saved your life?" Marigold added to Luffy's agony as the captain glanced between the 2 girls in frustration. "Let them go." His repeated words were said to no effect, much to his frustration. "I'm not gonna choose, this isn't fair." The 2 Snake sisters laughed, cruelly and emptily, as if his words had struck a chord. "Life's not fair." Sandersonia's tone was utterly bitter. "Things happen sometimes that we don't like." Marigold's tone was regretful, her words full of hatred, perhaps directed at herself. "And you had to stick with them." Luffy could hear their emotion, feel it in the air. The melancholy expressions he could see in their eyes did not match the stony visage they held onto their faces. Sometimes you just have to live with the scars. And sometimes you can't save everyone, you can't even save yourself. And once again, their expressions morphed into ones of sinister amusement. You have no hopes of fighting both of us. You're out of your league. You may be able to stop one of us if you tried, really hard. But the question is who you will save, isn't it? Because the second you choose one, the other will die. Luffy's eyes widened, a desperate, pleading gaze pouring from his face as his knees buckled in weakness. Please, please, stop it. His pleas fell on deaf ears. She admired the three of you, Nami bellowed, amidst her torture and pain, tears swimming in her eyes. All of these women do. Is this how yo? Nami's speech was cut off as Marigold squeezed her tail tighter, causing Nami to scream in pain once again. But what hurt her more was Luffy's face, now one of utter hopelessness, so similar to Sabaody. She had made a promise to herself, to Luffy, and yet here she was, staring into the same expression that now haunted her every waking moment. No, she wouldn't take this lying down, not again. Never again. Luffy, just save Margaret, Nami gasped. Marigold squeezing her tighter but unable to stop Nami from speaking, no matter how hard she tried. I'll be fine. Even if I die, it's my choice, okay? She would spare him the choice, she would spare him that responsibility. No, Nami, don't you dare, please, you too, just please let them go. Luffy screamed in rage, eyes watering. Either you save one of them, Sandersonia whispered. Or they both die, Marigold finished, tightening her choke on Nami until the woman could no longer breathe, her scream emerging as a breathless movement of her jaw. Luffy's gaze was blurred and unfocused. He wasn't. Stop it, his voice was so weak. So unlike him. Zoro looked up at the warlord, no fear in his eyes for himself, even as he barely clung to his own life. Stop it, Brook went out with laughter and a joke before being cast into the loneliness that Luffy knew would be nothing but traumatic. Unfair. So very unfair. I can't lose anyone else. Usopp's scream was without hope, completely and utterly without faith. He disappeared like that. Sanji, enraged and passionate, ran at the warlord without hope for himself. His cry of, "Damn it," was the last thing that could be heard, unable to protect those he cared about once again. Fading, always fading, let them go. Frankie, strong as steel and hard as iron, could do nothing as the palm struck him down. Would he never see him smile and dance again? Chopper had twisted himself into a monster, the one title he hated more than anything. All for naught, all for nothing. And Robin, she was already gone. Did she think he failed her? Did she know they all worried for her, even now? Please, tell me she knows. Stop, just, stop. Sandersonia and Marigold's tails rose high, the crowd neither cheering nor showing nearly enough grief or sympathy. Sweet Pea and Aphalandra's wails barely reached Luffy through his own internal collapse. Choose, Straw Hat. The Snake Sisters yelled as their tails came crashing down, and Luffy made eye contact with Nami. She was determined to survive, and perhaps she would. Luffy had endless faith in her, more than anyone else. But that voice, the one he ignored in the back of his head, spoke to him. What if she didn't? Haki, I told you to stoppp. The blast of wind that burst from him as he yelled in defiance kicked up a gust as great as Nami's entire storm earlier. The ground cracked and shuddered at the yell, the stands shaking at the pressure that had just been unleashed upon their faculties. The large serpent women froze in horror as the wind hit them, their eyes widening in disbelief. The wind lashed out at Hancock herself, who recoiled into the back of her snake throne, the gust blasting her hair back like a sea of snakes. Every body in the arena suddenly became utterly still. The Colosseum had fallen into a state of complete silence, to the point that one could hear the dust swirling across the ground. The wind eventually died down to a stillness, but the silence lingered regardless. And then, it happened. One woman, two more, five over there. Kuja's citizens and warriors began to collapse in the stands, slumping in their seats. Some fell backwards, resting against the cold stone. Others fell forwards, barely supported by their own body weight before collapsing. And some fell onto the shoulders of their concerned companions. But all were stunned. The small remainder of the crowd that managed to stay conscious broke. Our friends were dropping like flies. An air of nervousness traveled through the entire audience. The power Luffy had demonstrated unsettling them to their core. The two snake sisters paused exactly where they were, with both Nami and Margaret dangling upside down just an inch from the floor. Marigold was frozen, her posture slack enough that Nami squirmed her way out of the hold, taking huge gasps of air in relief. Sandersonia, surprisingly, placed Margaret gently on the floor. Luffy didn't hesitate for a second before sprinting over to Nami, who was still lying on the floor in a daze. The woman was too shaken to move, both from her emotional preparation for a potential death and the physical strain of being unable to breathe. The navigator shuddered on the floor as Luffy reached her, immediately noticing her strange shaking. Crouching down with perhaps the most care he had ever shown in his life, Luffy placed a hand on her shoulder. "Nami," his whisper was accompanied by a crack in his voice, his emotional stress not yet fully vanished. The sound of her name shook the orange-haired woman from her trance, and she froze. Slowly, she turned her head toward her captain. "LL Luffy." Her voice was hoarse and hesitant, but so very, very alive. Luffy grinned in reply. His trademark smile enough for Nami to shoot up and embrace him. Luffy was hardly surprised. He had been about to hug her himself. The two emotionally resonated as they held each other in their arms, as they were uniquely able to do. A pause lingered in the air. "I would have survived that, ya know?" Nami's murmur brought a smile to Luffy's face, her embrace settling his heart to its normal state. Just as much as she had hugged him for herself, Luffy knew she had also hugged him to help him. He stood to his feet gently, so as not to make her feel worse given they were still clinging to one another. "Yeah, but old man Pinwheel would have killed me." His voice briefly cracked with emotion, but after a deep breath, taking in her scent, tangerines and the wind, old paper and ink, Luffy fully settled. The two released each other, and though Nami had a blush on her cheeks, she hardly noticed. The sight of everyone in the stands burned a million questions in her mind given their unconscious states, but neither she nor Luffy cared. They both ran to Margaret in concern. They slid to their knees next to the statue, examining her for any cracks. Nami, much to her amused annoyance, had to push Luffy to the side when his analysis proved more distracting than helpful. Eventually, Nami breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing that the woman had no cracks, prompting Luffy to break out into a face-splitting grin. "Alright, not a scratch. Looks like you guys listened in the end. Thanks." His words were completely honest, but all Marigold and Sandersonia could do was stare at him in shock. The power he possesses. Does he have any idea? The snake duo practically spoke in unison, their minds reduced to disbelief. A second passed before they broke into their own muttered chatter. "I've only ever seen our sister use the haki of a conqueror. Why can this street rat use it?" Sandersonia had lost the plot at this point, dazed enough to warrant holding her palm against her forehead. "This boy, he has the quality of a king, the ability to stand above all others." Marigold could have fallen to her knees herself, if she currently had knees. Hancock was no less perturbed. She bit her thumb in caution, looking down at the beaming Luffy with a newfound stirring in her stomach. "He has the conqueror's haki, just like me. How could that be? This man, he's not just some brat." More curious shouts emerged from the crowd, at least from those who weren't unconscious. "How does he know that? The chances, they're 1 in a million. This man, it's not possible." Luffy ignored the whispers and refocused on the large snakes, shrugging, assuming it wasn't important. "You guys are really noisy. What the hell are you talking about anyway?" Nami, however, was less dismissive. That word again, haki. It wasn't just limited to the people of this island. They had said she possessed it, and now Luffy possessed some special kind as well. What the hell was going on? She was half tempted to demand answers from the Snake Sisters then and there. "He can't control it?" Sandersonia questioned in disbelief and perhaps a bit of relief. "Such power left unchecked, it could be devastating," Marigold hissed in panic. Luffy ignored their comments, preparing for the next bout of fighting. And Nami, for once, agreed with him, also preparing by stretching, trying to recover from Marigold's hold earlier. She could get her answers once this whole thing was over. "You guys are pretty strong. So, let's continue this fight and finish it up," Luffy announced with a cocksure smirk, cracking his knuckles in confidence. Nami nearly hit him on the back of the head, but after her near-death experience, she just wouldn't. She had been ready to die. No, that wasn't it. She had been ready to live, to survive no matter what. She had put everything on the line to make sure she would never see that expression on Luffy's face again. And that would be the case as long as she could help it. No more running, she would try to uphold that, at the very least. So, instead, Nami stepped in next to her captain, nervous but ready. She adjusted the straw hat that still rested on her head in a very Luffy-esque fashion, causing the captain to beam widely. You know what they say, limitation is the highest form of battery. Luffy laughed, and Nami's eyebrow twitched, her fist slamming atop his head. It's, imitation is the highest form of flattery, idiot. Luffy just laughed boisterously, and Nami shook her head fondly in return. Enough of this foolishness. Luffy and Nami snapped out of their banter to see the infuriated snake princess standing atop the platform from which she had been watching. Mari, Sonia, you have nothing to fear from that man, get rid of him and his witch. Luffy instantly paled, wrapping his arms around Nami to restrain her, in anticipation of the reaction he knew was coming. The orange-haired woman let out a squawk in protest, intending to march up the stairs to smack the irritating diva across the face. I'll show you what a witch I can be. Let me at her, I'll rip her to shreds. Her bellows were so loud that Luffy wanted to cover his ears, but he remained steadfast. Arms and legs thrashed as Luffy held her back, and eventually she settled, given the Snake Sisters turned to their prey, licking their lips. She's right, Mari, Sandersonia hissed eagerly, there's nothing to fear. Without control, Conqueror's haki is little more than added enthusiasm. Marigold blustered in agreement, standing straighter. Luffy held up a palm, as if he were a referee who had just blown a whistle. But first, I need to move her. I don't want her to break. The sisters looked past Luffy to see where his body faced. Margaret, still stone on the floor. Sandersonia grinned cruelly once again. My, you seem to be extremely calm. Her comment was meant to sound off-handed, but lingering injuries and events made it sound more manic. You still don't understand the situation. That statue doesn't matter one bit. With that loud yell, Sandersonia's tail lashed out toward Margaret. Luffy, having taken the statue in his arms, braced himself while remaining still. The tail struck his ribs with a thunk, loud enough to echo around the entire stadium. Luffy, Nami's concerned yell was met with a groan from the ebony-haired teen, who staggered forward as Sandersonia's tail slithered back toward its master. Why would you defend that statue? Sandersonia queried, puzzled beyond comprehension. When it means you'll take an attack in its place? Luffy let out a loud cough of pain, his winded state passing as he looked up at the two serpents. They had already begun to dehumanize Margaret, no longer considering her a person. She has nothing to do with our fight, does she? His smile fondly, the soft smile she sometimes directed his way subconsciously when no one was looking. The crowd fell silent at the outburst, but their eyes still trailed to the Snake Princess, who looked extremely frustrated and bored. Very well. The woman drawled, her deep blue eyes looking away from the battlefield. Allow him to move the statue. Big sister, Sandersonia murmured, turning to her captain in shock. Hancock, however, merely let an evil smile spread across her features. We will let the man fight to his heart's content, and then, we will remove it without mercy. Hancock's passionate order made Marigold smile, the crowd roaring so loudly it felt like they could shake the ground, despite there being fewer of them now. While the sisters and Hancock were talking, Luffy had already begun lowering Margaret back down toward Kikyu. Nami stood beside him, looking down at the statue of the other woman with a worried expression. She was fine as well, that was good. Luffy's face was full of sympathy as he gently placed Margaret on the floor beside her fellow Kuja statue. Sorry about this. I promise, just wait a little longer. Once we've beaten these two, we'll find a way to turn you both back to normal, Nami agreed. It was only fair they put their lives on the line for those who had done so for them. Done saying your goodbyes yet? The hiss came from behind them, and they turned to see Marigold and Sandersonia gearing up for battle. Are you prepared for your defeat? Marigold asked with a bloodthirsty smile. After all, this had gone on far longer than other executions. Luffy smacked his fist against his other hand. I've told you before. His retort was childish, yet somehow managed to sound confident and suave at the same time. "You're the ones who are getting beaten up." Nami shook her head with a roll of her eyes, while, yes, he was correct, they should really hurry up and beat these two already. Luffy had a lot of tricks left in his arsenal, though, this Nami knew, so she wasn't particularly worried about their chances of defeating these two snakes. But still, they couldn't just run headfirst into the fight. A strategy was needed, given the strange techniques the two had shown. Insolent as ever, Sandersonia hissed in amusement, the man continuing to prove a valuable source of entertainment. But it was Marigold who acted first. The orange-haired viper spat forward with her usual purple poison. Luffy tensed, preparing to dodge when, all of a sudden, he was shoved aside as Nami stepped forward with her 3 Klima-tacked parts in hand, all working under her fluid control. "Thunder Cage!" As she shouted her command, a shield of electricity formed around both her and Luffy, the poison slamming into the defense and almost immediately evaporating. Luffy, while in awe of Nami's cool technique, noticed the lightning dispel the poison before a light bulb went off in his head. "Psst, hey Nami." His voice came out as a whisper in her ear, or rather, Luffy's attempt at a whisper. "I need you to make the biggest thunderball you can." Nami raised her brow, confused about what Luffy was doing, but acquiesced, nonetheless. Nodding, the thunder cage dissipated as Nami ramped up the output of the lightning piece of her Klima-tacked Thunderball. The giant ball of lightning formed in front of her, and Marigold growled at the sight, spitting another blob of poison toward the two pirates. The ball intercepted the attack, evaporating it once again. But Luffy was by no means done. The raven-haired teen rushed around the crackling sphere of lightning, charging forward toward the orange-haired snake sister. Stretching his right arm back, it twisted into a coil as he flung it within the confines of the thunderball. The spark surged through Luffy's body, but, of course, he felt nothing. Another poisonous blob of spit was fired his way, but Luffy flung his arm forward in anticipation. The lightning-charged fist barreled forward, a spark still dancing on Luffy's arm. The surge of electricity smashed the poison into pieces and continued forward toward Marigold. Gum Gum Thor Rifle. Luffy's arm uncoiled, spinning with added force and velocity as it smashed into Marigold's stomach, discharging electricity through her body for good measure. The Golden Viper shrieked in pain from both the punch and the lightning, stumbling backward while the crowd of Kuja let out cries of anxious concern. Sandersonia caught her sister before she could fall, turning to Luffy with a rage-contorted face. "You, foolish monster!" Her tail lashed forward at the Straw Hat Captain, fast enough that Luffy failed to dodge the appendage as it struck his stomach, sending him flying backward and choking. Luckily for the rubber man, Nami was waiting below, catching him in her arms. Luffy panted in exhaustion but still beamed at Nami regardless. One down, one to go. His celebration didn't last long, however, as a voice interjected in annoyance. "Please," Luffy paled at the familiar voice, his head rising to look properly. "I'm not down yet." Marigold then lurched back up with a resounding crack, before smirking at the two pirates, continuing her taunting. "Lucky hit, but you're already beaten." Luffy frowned in confusion, about to retort that he had no idea what she was blathering about, when a stream of purple gas began to flood the arena from where Nami's thunder cage had been. Stumbling out of Nami's grip, Luffy coughed loudly as poison filled his lungs, making it awfully hard to breathe. The navigator soon echoed his wheezes, straining to take in oxygen as she choked on the gas. A loud laugh caused her to look up at Marigold, whose chortles could have echoed across the island. "Fools! My poison isn't just contact-based. It also has fumes that cause your body to shut down, in agony. I might add," the Yellow Viper announced happily, while Luffy swayed from side to side, spluttering on the air he was breathing in. "Looks like the poison is already in effect," Sandersonia pointed out with a chuckle, her tail lashing forward and striking Luffy through the poisonous cloud. The black-haired teen recoiled in pain as he was slammed into the ground. "It won't be long now." Sandersonia's cackle was cut off by a sharp wind, the burst of power dispersing the gas and forcing it to rest above the spike pit instead. Cyclone tempo. The Snake Sisters lurched back in surprise before casting their gaze to Nami standing in the center of the arena. The navigator caught the pieces of the klima tack that had caused the gust and began tossing them up and down in her languid grip. "Nice try, but I'm a master of the weather. But do try better next time." Nami's voice was sly as she threw a wink at the two enraged serpents, while Luffy stood up from the floor with a grin and a cackle of his own. Nami was always stronger than she gave herself credit for, and Luffy would happily spend the rest of his life reminding her of that. His head snapped in her direction as she approached. "All right, Luffy. I've got a plan." The navigator leaned over and whispered in his ear, and as she continued, his grin grew wider and wider. The sight of his hat atop his navigator's head made him beam even more, and Luffy stood up fully as Nami finished reciting her idea. A chuckle burst from his lips. "Yeah, that'll work." The two seemed awfully conspiratorial with one another, their light smiles and giggles, mischievous expressions matched only by their delighted gazes. As Zoro would often point out, when Luffy and Nami got into fervors like these, where they giggled and conspired, everyone should duck for cover immediately. They brought out the worst in each other at times, or rather, amplified their absolute worst traits in one another. Luffy became a little nastier and meaner, while Nami grew more chaotic and mentally unhinged. Basically, no one should, under any circumstances, let Luffy and Nami conspire on their own during times of competition. They knew each other too well and thus mirrored each other in a weird, creepy way. And while this fight the jeers from the Snake Sisters and the crowd certainly made it feel that way. Luffy got into his battle stance with a mocking grin, one leg in front of the other and one fist pointing forward, the other to the side. Nami grinned manically, spinning the klima tack, which had once again been assembled into its staff form. "What are they planning?" Marigold murmured, watching the two with curiosity. Sandersonia, however, seemed put off by their change in attitude. It was a little creepy, actually. They needed to be ready for anything. The two quickly showed her why her concern was warranted. Cool charge. The cool ball emerged from the tip of her klima tack, and the sisters watched curiously. What could the witch possibly be doing? Now, Mirage Tempo. Fata Morgana. At Nami's shout, the cool ball launched forward, and Luffy was engulfed by the cool breeze before suddenly disappearing. It didn't take long before the sight of him reformed. But this time, there was more than one Luffy. The middle Luffy was the same grinning idiot from before, but the other four weren't. One was Luffy as a child, as if suffering the side effects of third gear. Another was a rather overweight Luffy. An all too familiar sight, but he grinned like a madman, nonetheless. The other two Luffys were overly muscular, one incredibly tall and the other slim. "Oh yeah," Kid Luffy cried happily. "Looks like you're seeing double, huh?" Tall Luffy mocked with his lower lip jutted out. "Or maybe triple?" Fat Luffy turned around and slapped his backside in mockery, a mean expression on his face. "In fact, wouldn't it be more like seeing, what are the 4 and 5 ones again?" the muscular Luffy asked, scratching his head in confusion. "And if you thought one of me was tough," the normal Luffy boasted, crossing his arms with a mocking grin on his face. "Let's see how you do with 5, and with that, the group of Luffys charged forward with a yell. "See clones?" Marigold gasped, her eyes wide with awe as she looked around in confusion. "Don't be fooled, Mari," Sandersonia exclaimed, her teeth gritted in frustration. "The Weather Witch uses mirages. Only one of them must be real." The normal Luffy made a phony, almost pouty face at Marigold, jumping next to her for a moment before retreating. "Ah, you gonna cry 'cause you can't figure out the baby weather stuff?" Marigold and Sandersonia could have destroyed the entire arena then and there. There was no way they were going to let this idiotic man patronize them. As they lost their cool and control, they heard Nami giggle, a sly smile appearing on her face. "Luffy's right, of course." She stuck her tongue out like a cat, jeering at them as if to provoke an attack. But the million-berry question is, which one of us is it? The Luffys mocked and jeered, some giving the furious Snake Sisters the finger before launching toward them. Now gum gatling. The endless storm of fists was a sight to see, with the entire crowd screaming in concern as the barrage of limbs became impossible to track. Panicked, Sandersonia tried to use her observation haki to figure out what was going on. Not that it would be effective anyway, but her fury from being mocked by the rubber man made it basically useless. Left, right, the attacks are coming from everywhere. Sandersonia's fear was getting the better of her, but Marigold had already figured out a solution. "Do not worry, Sonia," her yell reached her sister in time. While most of the fists collided with the Snake Sisters, only the muscular Luffy made contact, his fists bouncing off Marigold. Luffy fell backward, swearing like a sailor as Marigold grinned in glee. The color of armament is too strong for any illusion to fool. The mirages slowly faded until only the muscular Luffy remained. Then, the muscles disappeared, and the real Luffy stood up from the dust. Nami's smile and bold nature had faded by this point, as their plan had failed. "Sorry, Luffy," her tone was full of regret as she adjusted the straw hat on her head. No. Luffy cut her off with a hand outstretched in front of her face, a smirk on his lips. "It could work. Time to go up a gear." Nami tilted her head in confusion before realizing he meant the statement quite literally. With a smirk of her own, Nami nodded, casting another cool charge, as instructed. This time, however, she tripled the output, understanding the fundamentals of Luffy's planned technique. Mirage Tempo. Fata Morgana. Her tone was full of confidence, and once again, 5 Luffys stood before the Snake Sisters. The 2 Kuja watched in confusion as the 5 mirages of the man got into an odd position. A horse stance with one fist on the floor and the other on one knee. Second gear. At their yell, the rubber man's legs buckled, acting as pumps that extended to his ankles. His skin turned a light red, and Luffy slipped into the familiar feeling of his breathing and heartbeat hitching for a moment before the latter picked up double time. Steam leaked from his every pore, billowing upward in defiance of the cool air of the mirage, yet still conforming to the triple-strength mirage. Now, the normal Luffy stood with a smirk on his face. "Let's see if you can still keep up," all 5 Luffys chorused together as they disappeared into 5 separate blurs. Each one dashed around the arena, ricocheting off walls, stands, and seats, but always bouncing back to the stadium. The crowd gasped and murmured, wondering what could possibly be going on, as the Snake Sisters attempted to keep track of at least 1 Luffy, let alone 5. So fast, Marigold was panicking now, clutching her polearm closer as her grip widened from the sheer strength of her hold. "Impossible," Sandersonia muttered, perhaps to reassure herself. "This is impossible. My color of observation can't keep up with him." The 5 blurs continued to bounce to and fro, waiting for the right moment to attack. "Now Gum Gum Jet, left," Sandersonia yelled as the fat Luffy appeared in the air next to her. Her tail quickly rose and struck her opponent, only for the appendage to pass through as the mirage dissipated. Her eyes widened in horror. A mirage? "Pistol!" A voice bellowed from behind the Snake Sister. The sheer force of the attack sent her head slamming forward with a horrific crack. Her head slammed into the ground, blood seeping from her mouth as her vision swam and the sounds around her became muffled. Marigold's panicked screams went unheard before a jet whip sent her spiraling to the side as well. Whatever was happening now, it was no contest. If they didn't act soon, the man would kill them. Run, as fast as you can," Luffy's taunt filled the air as her hearing returned, the sound ringing across the entire stadium. "You can't catch me, I'm a rubber man." Nami watched Luffy with a smile, leaning back to relax, intending to let him finish up. It was pretty much over, in her opinion, at least. She watched as Sandersonia grit her teeth with rage, rising to her full height. "If you won't hold back, then neither will I." Her roar shook the arena, and the crowd recoiled in fear as they felt the presence of her power. Snake hair possession. 8-branch great snake. At her words, her hair rose and twisted around. Green locks coiled and turned, morphing into 8 giant green serpents. One of the green snakes snarled and launched itself at one of the blurs. However, the blur quickly dodged the attack and continued hopping around the arena like a grasshopper. The hair snake that smashed the ground shattered the tiles of the charred arena to pieces. Nami gazed in shock as Luffy continued to dodge. "This is just like that guy from CP9, Luffy. It may look weird, but it's still hair. You should be able to break it," Nami shouted, providing her captain with insight she gained from the Enies lobby incident. Meanwhile, Sandersonia was panicking, to quite a large degree. "Why can't I keep up with him? I can predict his movements, but he's just too fast." Thunderbolt, tempo. Santo jerked away from the sound of the voice, but it was too late. The lightning struck her from above, eliciting a scream as the electricity tore through every cell in her body. The green-haired snake turned to glare at Nami, who pulled down her eyelid and stuck her tongue out. Just before the Kuja warrior could react, she was interrupted again. Gum Gum Jet Missile. Luffy's voice bellowed from behind her as two hands gripped her shoulders before a body slammed into her spine at impossible speeds. Tears wormed their way from Sandersonia's eyes as the pain tore through her back. If this continued, she was going to die. She looked up to see the child Mirage grinning at her. "So, you're the real one," Marigold shouted in rage at the sight of her sister being struck, appearing beside the rubber boy with a snarl. The child Luffy twisted in the air, stretching his arms backward as he did so. "Now, Gum Gum Jet," the child shouted with a big grin on his face, while Marigold predicted the blow with her observation haki, holding out her palms in front of her. "It's useless." A confident smirk crossed her face. "You cannot break through my haki." "Bazooka." Arrogance never pays. Luffy's arms blitzed towards Marigold, and the force of his palms slammed into Marigold's own. A huge blast of wind roared from the point of impact, and the gold serpent attempted to brace herself. But no matter how hard she tried, the sheer force of the almighty attack pushed her backward. Marigold tumbled backward, hitting the steps behind her with a pained groan, hands shaking in trauma and pain. The crowd, of course, screamed loudly in outrage. The child Luffy landed next to Nami, grinning like an idiot. "Oi, Nami! You see how awesome we are?" His shout was accompanied by his massive grin, and Nami responded with her own wide smile and a nod. Their hands clapped together in mid-air as Luffy morphed back into his normal shape, their high five echoing throughout the arena despite the crowd's cries. Before Nami could reply, a voice cut her off. Again. "Sonia, Mari." The two pirates looked at the furious Hancock upon her snake throne, the warlord gritting her teeth in disappointed rage. "Why are you still playing around? Get serious and kill them now." The two serpent women struggled to get up, clearly injured by the way their limbs shook. Yet, they still bowed low to the floor, offering their apologies. "Sorry, sister. We shall not fail you again." Someone, however, wasn't having any of that. "Why are you treating your own sisters like shit?" Nami's voice rang through the arena, snapping both Marigold and Sandersonia out of their daze. Hancock was taken aback by the navigator's bold yell, stunned. "They've been fighting for you down here against us, while you've been up there sitting your ugly ass on her snake." Blinded by rage, Nami continued. Luffy glanced at her from the corner of his eye before humming to himself. He knew Nami missed her sister, perhaps even more so now that Robin wasn't here. A sad frown crossed his face, despite the continued shouting. "If you think you can do better than them, then come on down here and prove it." Nami's glare was passionate, enough to stun the crowd into silence once again. Perhaps one or two of them even considered what she was actually saying. Nami gripped her Klimattact, swinging the pole forward as a small ball of thunder launched toward the Snake Princess. However, before it could reach its target, it was stopped by Marigold's fist. "How dare you raise your unworthy weapon against our sister?" Her bellow was angry and full of fury, with Sandersonia sharing her rage as she lashed out at the navigator with her tail. Just before the tail could strike, Nami was swept off her feet and carried out of the way. Nami sighed, placing her hand to her forehead, relaxing in Luffy's arms for a moment. She didn't need to open her eyes to know it was her captain. She had lost her cool. The raven-haired pirate gently placed her on her feet before looking up at the serpents with a growl. Sandersonia and Marigold quickly slithered into position, so that they could surround the two pirates. "Now, we end this," the two yelled in unison once again. Sandersonia's hair stood up once more, forming 8 serpents. Snakehair possession. 8-branch great snake. The hair snakes hissed at their targets as Marigold licked her lips in anticipation. She produced a lighter to create a spark, then allowed the bright, fierce flame to engulf her entire body. Snakehair possession. Salamander. Marigold roared as the flame raged around her, snakes of flame forming from her hair. "What? She's on fire." The two snake sisters smiled as the crowd cheered at the ultimate attack they were witnessing. They ignored the bluster of their fellow Kuja and focused solely on Luffy and Nami. There is no escape. The snakes descended upon them, but Luffy and Nami reacted without fail. Thunder charge! Nami shouted, lifting her Klima tacked high above her head. The staff's end began to spark, electricity spinning like a vortex. Gum gum, Luffy drawled, jumping up and spinning so his legs faced upward. As he reached the spot directly above Nami, he stretched his arms downward. The Klima tact made contact with his arms, and a charge of electricity coursed through his body. The hair serpents quickly descended on Luffy, but he was much faster. Jet Thor stamped Gatling. Luffy's legs became a blur as they struck upward at the descending hair serpents. The sheer force of the lightning, combined with Luffy's attack, instantly broke the hair, just as Nami had predicted. The two snakes stared in shock as their hair went limp and lifeless. "That's not all," Luffy shouted, shifting the momentum of his kicks outward into two strikes in perpendicular directions, careening horizontally until they slammed into the stomachs of the Snake Sisters. The two screamed in agony as they fell forward, collapsing into each other. Marigold's contact with Sandersonia quickly set her alight, and the green-haired woman recoiled as her entire body burst into flames. "Damn it, Sonia! Move away!" Marigold pushed her away to free her from the flames, but Sandersonia was in such pain, evident from her shrieking wails, that she fell to the floor. The flaming serpent was shocked when she felt herself being dragged toward her tumbling sister. "Looks like you two are beaten," a voice called from below. Marigold looked down in rage to see the orange-haired witch smirking up at her, standing next to two tied serpent tails. "No, when did that happen?" Marigold's shrieks were ignored by Nami, who turned to see Luffy standing nearby, no longer under the effects of second gear. She practically skipped toward him with a delighted smile before slamming his straw hat onto his head. Luffy buckled for a moment before looking up at her from under the brim of his hat with a massive smile. Nami sighed fondly, and the two exchanged a high five. "Next time, let's go all out from the beginning." "Ah, but that's no fun, Sister Sonia. Watch out!" Marigold's cries briefly caught their attention as they glanced in her direction. "The trench of spikes. It's right behind you. Quick, grab hold of the railing." Her panic briefly made Nami feel bad until the navigator remembered that they had nearly killed Margaret, and her, for that matter. Still, Sandersonia did as instructed while she toppled backward, grabbing hold of the railing just in time. So close, the Green Viper breathed, sighing in relief for a moment. High above the arena, Hancock seethed with rage. The two pests had just defeated her own sisters in combat. And while Hancock could certainly kill them herself if she wanted, the fact was that the execution had failed. The two had proven their innocence through their strength. Her pride would never recover from this defeat. How humiliating! She managed through gritted teeth, her nails digging into her chair in rage. Salome groaned in displeasure. The pain his mistress caused palpable. Upon noticing, Hancock briefly relented but still allowed healing would have overwhelmed her if she hadn't noticed Sandersonia. Her sapphire eyes widened in horror. No, instantly, Hancock felt the world open up around her, as if a dark pit had emerged to swallow her whole. It may as well have done. Sandersonia's back was exposed, and the Kuja would see the mark that lay upon it. Panic stirred in her lungs as Hancock wrenched her eyes shut, suddenly finding it hard to breathe as her heart thundered in her chest. No, this couldn't be happening. This couldn't be happening. What was going to become of her? What about her sisters? The Kuja would realize the story behind the mark was a lie, that the curse had been made up. Would they be banished for their sins? Their crime of being slaves? Their fault, her fault. All her fault. Tears welled up behind her shut eyes as her arms wrapped around herself in a feeble attempt to stifle her panic. No, she couldn't be found out. She was their ruler, their princess. No, they would burn her, hate her, and they would harm her. They would cast her out, and she would be controlled again. Hancock braced herself for the outrage of the crowd. What is that man doing on Sonia's back? Is he going to kill her? No, Sonia. Hancock's eyes snapped open, and she gasped. The man they had sentenced to death, who had mocked and persecuted them, he was now holding onto Sonia, obscuring the mark on her back. No, what was he? This wasn't. You monster! Sandersonia yelled, gazing up at the pirate clinging to her back as she attempted to shake him off. Don't move, Luffy whispered to her, still clinging on. Sandersonia was far too enraged to listen and turned to face her sister. Briefly, her eyes fell upon the orange-haired witch, who was leaning against the railing and staring at her with a sad, sympathetic smile. If Sandersonia had been in a better state of mind, she would have realized how comforted that smile made her feel. But alas, she was enraged. Mari, kill this impudent bastard, now. But Mari did not move, instead staring at her in shock and horror. Why? Mari, what are you doing? I can't, Marigold barely gasped out, Sandersonia's eyes widening, because, right now, that man is protecting us. The angry crowd fell silent at Marigold's words, finally taking a moment to properly gaze at where Luffy was coiled. The truth swept through the crowd like a wave of panic. Sandersonia's back is exposed. The Gorgon's eye is being obscured by that man. If we see it, we'll all be turned to stone, Sandersonia gasped for air, the panic that had been welling up in her dissipating to make way for relief and confusion. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared up at the rubber man. Why, we would rather die than reveal the secret that lies on our backs. And that secret is one that you two will now take to the grave. Just because you want to kill me, Luffy began, and from the railing, Nami's smile grew even fonder as he smiled softly at Sandersonia. Doesn't mean I want to kill you. So, stay still, okay? Tears leaked from Sonia's eyes as she was forced to stifle her sobs, looking away from Luffy in shame, trying to hold in her relief. Thank you so much, she barely managed to get the words out through gritted teeth, her voice strained by her efforts to hold back her tears. The show is over, Hancock's booming voice echoed across the stadium. Before the Gorgon eye is exposed. Clear out of the arena. The rush of feet drowned out everything else for a moment as the stands emptied, the remaining Kuja dashing for the exits while carrying their unconscious friends. Luffy gazed at two of Margaret's friends, who stared at him for a moment longer along with another black-haired woman, but they rushed out before he could figure out what their deal was. Sandersonia tensed as she felt Luffy's weight shift from her back, involuntarily seizing with panic. All right, they're gone now, you can stand up again. But the snake sister didn't move, frozen in place as her brain tried to regain control of her body. The man and woman, they had saved her. She would not be removed from Amazon Lily, all because of them. Stunned, she barely reacted as Luffy leapt from her shoulder, landing beside his navigator with a wide, room-lighting smile. The orange-haired woman shook her head, flicking his forehead in a fond gesture. The two looked into each other's eyes, and for the briefest moment, only a second, they held a silent conversation. Just as Luffy and Zoro always did. Just as Nami had always been jealous of. Nami's heartbeat accelerated, her veins feeling like plumes of lava as she continued to stare into her captain's eyes. A million words were exchanged in that single millisecond, but to Nami, it felt like it lasted forever. She might understand his heart more than anyone in the crew, but his head? That was Zoro's territory. And for a moment, Nami had stolen it like the thief she so gloriously was. Her heart still thundering, she desperately tried to grasp for more. Nami had always been greedy, but for the sake of others. Only after Arlong did she add herself to the equation. But now it was just for herself. Perhaps, for the first time, truly for herself. For a single, reality-shattering instance, she had stolen her captain, taking more pieces of him to understand and know than any other member of the crew. Yet, exhilarated as she was, the more she tried to hold onto it, the more it faded, until Nami was left with nothing but her captain's dark, grayish eyes, peering at her as they always did, practically unreadable. Nami could have cried right there, mourning the loss. Hell, she had to take a breath to steady her heartbeat and come to terms with what had just happened, with whatever her thought process had been. What the hell was that? Collecting herself, she let a soft smile cross her face as she stepped beside him. You dork. Oi, ya meanie. Elder Nyan stepped forward from her place at the top of one of the stands, looking down at Hancock's podium. The snake princess was panting, clutching her head to stave off a migraine. This man, she didn't understand him. This wasn't right. Hancock allowed herself to fall backward onto Salome with a subdued whimper. She covered her eyes as she sat, completely motionless except for the occasional drops of water that fell from her face. Hancock had broken. Nyan shook her head. Though you may fool this kingdom, you Cyano keep deceiving yourself forever, Snake Princess. Granny Nyan's words were soft, motherly. For why had you sisters Hyave on your backs? Nyan's voice faltered as she stared at Hancock and the sisters in utter pity. The warlord didn't move from her spot for quite some time. Broken, just as the celestial dragons had left her. The orange sky faded into night, albeit very slowly. The cobbled white streets of Weatheria darkened to a gray hue, as the setting sun could no longer shine its light fully onto the sky island. And as this light faded, a silhouette skipped across the horizon. The silhouette turned out to be an old man with a long white beard and a blue robe cascading down his body. He calmly walked down the street, humming a happy tune. So far, his day had been quite excellent. He had enjoyed his lunch at the cafe and even managed to sell rain magic to some locals in the desert, not only bringing in profit but also helping some people in the process. He chortled happily at his successes, walking along jubilantly until he came to an abrupt stop. For standing in front of him was a very large man, over 20 feet tall and as wide as a carriage. He wore a long black cloak, patterned with a white circle with lines radiating from it. But more than that, more than all those things, this man was familiar. Hey, 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 the old man greeted, as the larger individual turned to him. Nice to see you again, friend. How have you been these last few years? Did you find the cure for sapphire scales like you wanted? Down at the wizard? Eyes hidden under a sack-like hat decorated with paw prints but a happy smile gracing his face. I did. Thank you very much for inquiring, Harades. But, I was wondering if you could do me one last favor. Or rather, if I could do you one last favor. The old man tilted his head to the side, prompting the large man to elaborate. Have you ever been to the Calm Belt? That question elicited a wave of sadness in the old man, who lowered his eyes. Alas, as you know, this island can only travel where the wind takes us. So, none of us have ever been there. What if I could change that by sending you there? The old man's eyes widened in shock. Surely, he couldn't be serious. Hey, 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 you would do that for us? The giant nodded. A soft smile once again on his face. It was a kind smile. One the old man had remembered liking when the bear man had initially approached him about his plight in their first meeting, and it put Harades completely at ease. A small paw-shaped air bubble formed in the giant's hands. I will send you there, but in return, you must promise to help a friend of mine. His tone was clear, honest, and kind. As usual. The old man nodded happily. It seemed a fair trade to him, and besides, anything for a friend, right? I promise. We've all wanted to traverse the Calm Belt for so long. We'll do anything. The giant smiled at his honesty and nodded. Very well then, we shall begin. With that, the giant threw the paw bubble to the ground. The moment it made contact, it expanded instantly, enveloping the island and shifting it. The earth rumbled beneath the old man's feet, and he would have fallen if not for the giant's steadying hand. Find the one known as the Weather Witch, the pod man explained, turning and walking away before the old wizard could even thank him. He disappeared, his voice echoing on the wind. When you wish to leave the Calm Belt, activate that transponder snail, and I shall return to aid you. The old man looked down to see a bronze transponder snail at his feet, which he gently picked up and pocketed. What a very kind man. Chapter 7. The Mark on a Backstory. We're sorry, big sister, not only did we lose, but we were also saved by the enemy. We have shamed you. Hancock merely remained silent as her sisters peppered her with apologies, all of which were drowned out by the storm raging in the recesses of her mind. The outcome of this affair had opened the abyss beneath her feet, and she and her family had come so close to the absolute worst-case scenario. To be spared by this man, nothing damaged her pride more. And yet, she couldn't tear her eyes away from him as he gently inspected the statues, poking them with interest. Something in Hancock's stomach twisted and churned as the man turned his attentive eyes to his orange-haired companion. She's okay. Luffy's happy tone filled the arena, and Nami smiled brightly back in response. However, it didn't take long for the pirate captain to notice he was being watched. He slightly turned toward Hancock and caught her hawk-like gaze from the corner of his eye. but it was evident that his focus was on the pirate empress. "What? You want to fight next?" His scoff forced Nami's jaw to drop as the navigator noticed how Hancock's eye twitched before her face morphed into a scowl of open hostility. The orange-haired pirate's rebuke came out in brief panic, not particularly keen on engaging a warlord in fisticuffs. "Idiot. Don't go picking fights with more people." Luffy frowned, tilting his head at her and not sparing a second thought to the snake princess's odd stare before a shout emerged from his lips. "Huh? Weren't you trying to pick a fight with her like 5 minutes ago?" An argument began to break out between the two, but the clearing of Hancock's throat marked the end of the exchange. "That is enough." Both Straw Hat pirates rounded on Hancock in perfect unison, a sight that annoyed her more than it unnerved her. Her glare matched the feeling, yet she couldn't help but be truthful to the two foreigners despite everything. "I have no intention of fighting the two of you." Her bitter tone was clear as day and matched her mixed feelings of relief and anger. How could she be both indebted to and hate the two before her? Hancock could barely decipher those feelings, let alone the ones that surfaced when a smile appeared on Luffy's lips. "Then, you're gonna fix them, right?" The warlord felt her brain twist and turn at the words, her eyes widening in disbelief, matched by the gasps from both Sandersonia and Marigold. To command her, of all people? "What did you say?" Hancock's murmur did not do her anger credit, as it was slowly turning from a stifled flame into a raging inferno once again. "Luffy, I wouldn't do that," Nami advised, yet the navigator didn't really properly attempt to dissuade her captain. After all, their options were rather limited in getting Margaret and Kiku turned back to normal, and Luffy's direct approach was one of the few ideas that came to mind. Still, she didn't particularly trust Hancock. She would trust Frankie to one day try trousers more than she did the Snake Princess. Luffy, sensing her subtle agreement, pressed on. "They were only trying to help us, please. Turn them back to normal." Hancock clenched her fist, feeling her haki rise in waves, calling for her to crush the peons beneath her. How dare he attempt to control her, after he had saved Sandersonia from the abyss? Men, they were all the same. They all demanded the same control over her. She would have to wrench such control from him by force. A small smile crossed her lips. Yes, that was what she would do. That was how she would get the man to reveal his true nature. "I do have the means to turn the two back to their old selves." Hancock could have laughed at the way her two prisoners' faces lit up. Yes, she would show them. "However, you said that there was a place you wanted to sail to, did you not?" The man's smile widened, yet Hancock saw the girl's face fall instantly. Oh, Hancock could bask in the feeling for days. Watching the moment the pirate's hope turned to despair. The man, idiot that he was, seemed to miss the growing implication. "Yeah. Our friends are scattered and we need to regroup." His gestures and hopeful tone to his quiet companion allowed Hancock's grin to widen to an almost sickeningly large size. "Is that so?" Her voice was smooth, calculated, and in control. "I'm afraid that I will only do one of those things you have asked of me." The gasp that escaped the man's lips almost sent pleasured shivers up Hancock's spine. "Do you choose to have these two statues returned to normal, or do you choose to leave this island in peace? Select one of these goals, and abandon the other. Can't we make a deal or something?" The orange-haired tramp's words infuriated Hancock. While her tone didn't seem desperate, in fact, Hancock would assess that the woman had already made up her mind. It was still impudent. This lesser girl. This stray cat who twisted her insides like no other woman had ever done. How dare she believe she was capable of negotiating with the leader of the Kuja? Hancock would put her in her place. "I believe I asked the man for his choice, not you for yours." The snapping noise of the orange-haired woman's mouth shutting in response to Hancock's glare sent shivers down the warlord's spine. Her heart rate finally steadied. Control, she was in control once more. And yet, it seemed the woman was waiting for the man to make a decision regardless. Perhaps she had interjected out of stupidity, or absent-mindedness. Hancock was quite sure the woman had nothing between her two Aya. "Really? Thanks, then, you're gonna save them, right?" The man's happy yell ripped Hancock from her internal reverie, eliciting a gasp as she watched his forehead hit the floor in a bow. The navigator followed with a similar bow after being prompted by the man, relieved but not surprised by the Straw Hat captain's decision. "Thank you so much." "What, that wasn't," he The two pirates prattled to one another about his manners, and all Hancock could do was stare, biting her lip so hard it could draw blood. Everything she knew and held true had been shattered in a single day. The very principles that had ruled her life since escaping from. No, this wasn't possible. Who the hell was this man? Who would have thought that a man could actually defeat the Snake Sisters? To think our island has been shamed. Defeat at the hands of a man. The chatter amongst the Kuja women was rising in volume, loud enough to reach Aphelandra's ears and make her wince. She and Sweet Pea, after the ordeal at the arena, had been subdued into silence. Perhaps in grief, perhaps in contemplation, or perhaps a combination of both, with an element of shock mixed in. Don't blame the Snake Sisters. The man, he must have cheated. Used some kind of trick with that witch of his. You think so? What I saw was a defeat of two of our strongest warriors, at the hands of two strangers no less. The island of women, fat lot of good that did us. How dare you? This is a proud nation, a strong nation. They had allowed Kikyu to sacrifice herself on their behalf. Or rather, they had allowed Kikyu to stand alone with Margaret to face the judgment of their snake princess. Aphelandra couldn't help but wonder if, in another life, she would have been braver. That she could have stood up for her friend and what they believed in. But Kikyu had compelled her into submission, the greater warrior that she was, and all she could do was watch and cry. A proud nation who just lost. Think about that. Two of the fiercest we have to offer, veterans of the New World, brought to heel by a boy and a spy. Our island means nothing now. Nothing? Think of the Snake Princess. You tart. How dare you disrespect her that way? It was pathetic. The shame she felt was deserved. Aphelandra knew. Sweet Pea likely felt the same, given her downcast expression as she focused on a rather fascinating patch of dirt on the floor. I am thinking of the Snake Princess. That disgusting man beat her tea of her, our empress, the shame that has been brow. They were pathetic. Aphelandra bit her bottom lip, fists tightening in anger as she listened to the prattle of her compatriots. Why were they focusing on something as stupid as pride? Margaret and Kikyu had nearly died. If not for the man, they would have experienced execution alongside their eternal damnation. In fact, it seemed the Snake Sisters were the bad guys here, attacking her friends who couldn't fight back. Since when? Since when had the Kuja lost all their honor? Aphelandra, Sweet Pea, you both seem troubled. The calm yet eloquent voice that cut in made the two women jump. Turning while trying to stabilize their breaths, they gazed down at Belladonna, who maintained a calm and comforting exterior. Little did they know of the storm that raged in the witch doctor's heart. It was anger, not at herself, not at the man, not at Nami. No, it was something far more treasonous. For Belladonna battled a deep-seated anger towards her snake princess. She did not suffer an existential crisis like the two warriors she had just addressed. No, Belladonna was too wise for that. The practice of medicine allowed for no errors of that kind. After all, if a doctor faltered, then the eternal battle against sickness and mortality would be lost. It was with this calculated and pragmatic gaze that Belladonna saw the truth. After all, while Nami and the man, whom Belladonna could now correctly identify as Luffy, had been invaders of their island, they seemed mostly harmless. They only defended themselves when attacked, helped others in need, and held no ill will towards the people of Amazon Lily. Yet when Kikyu and Margaret spoke on their behalf and stood brave, it was the Snake Princess who punished their bravery. Strength was respect. Strength was beauty. The Kuja pirates were their greatest. This was true. And yet, was it not the city defenders who ardently defended their borders, while the Kuja pirates brought honor to their island? Was it not Margaret and Kikyu who dedicated everything to making sure the Snake Princess had a home to return to? And this was how they were repaid. Belladonna thought back to last year, to the defectors incident. A group of women from Amazon Lily rebelled against the Snake Princess after making a trip beyond the borders. Radicalized, they had been called. Brains filled with foreign ideas as they set up an outpost in protest on Rusukaina. They had been crushed, and it had been celebrated. After all, those who defied the Snake Princess deserved death, did they not? And so it was that Belladonna found herself thinking a traitorous thought. One that she would suppress, at least for now. What if they had been right? Thankfully, before she could delve further into her thoughts, Sweet Pea's response snapped her from her reverie. The saga of "We are fine." However, it was evident from her tone that she was not fine. Aphelandra's silence indicated the same. Their concern for their fellow city defenders was palpable. Perhaps the Snake Princess will let Margaret and Kiku go free. Belladonna didn't know why she said it. Perhaps it was some half-baked attempt at bargaining with the universe. Or perhaps a sweet lie to delude them into thinking everything would be okay despite knowing otherwise. Or perhaps, if she said it with enough conviction, it would become true. Daisy, however, with her noticeable laugh and vacant stare, decided to interject. "Shows what you know." The orange-haired Kuja pirate flicked her hair to the side, laughing once again. The Snake Princess will never forgive the insolence and treachery those two cowards displayed. Belladonna felt a snake coil around her heart, hissing in indignation as she opened her mouth to speak, only for another voice to cut her off. "Shut up." Everyone stared in utter shock at the usually meek Aphelandra, who glared down at Daisy with such vehemence she looked ready to draw her weapon. The shock was enough to make the offending Kuja pirate step back, with Rand stepping in front of her in a pragmatic attempt to de-escalate. "Unfortunately, I believe Daisy is correct. The Snake Princess is fair, but also ruthless." The two city defenders groaned quietly and painfully, hanging their heads in the realization that they would never see Kiku and Margaret again. Belladonna, however, could once again only stare at Rand. Fair? How was executing those loyal to you fair? It seemed to her that the Snake Princess had done nothing but you. The loud creak that echoed through the area snapped the witch doctor out of her dangerous line of thinking, and everyone turned their heads toward the source of the interruption. Hearts shuddered, eyes filled with tears, and gasps could be heard amidst the shocked silence, for within the doorway stood a stunned yet alive duo, with color in their cheeks and not a hint of stone in sight. Margaret and Kiku still seemed somewhat dazed, likely a side effect of the petrification process. Still, the same couldn't be said for everyone else. Margaret, Kiku. Everyone called their names, but Aphelandra and Sweet Pea's wails towered over the rest, the two women in tears as they practically leapt toward their friends. The crowd followed, unable to catch up to the two women as they swept the former statues into their arms. Their babbles and apologies were met with delighted laughter from Margaret and an annoyed protest from Kiku, which seemed to hint at a blooming smile. The city defenders reunited once more. Belladonna herself was stunned with relief at seeing the two alive, yet remained on the fringe of the crowd. She would express her happiness later. For now, she would let the two regain their bearings. It didn't take long for Sweet Pea and Aphelandra to settle once Margaret consoled them, though the latter still clung to Kiku as if she might disappear at any moment. The crowd, however, soon grew impatient. "What's going on? How are you two alive? You two really worried us after you suddenly protected that man out of nowhere." Margaret frowned in confusion. Statues? Kiku remained silent, her memories returning to her like a distant breeze. Not fully apparent, but present enough that she could make out what they were referring to. After all, she had been expecting it. Though, she was still somewhat stunned by the interaction that had taken place in the arena a few moments ago. "You two don't remember?" Narine asked, unable to interpret Kiku's internal realization, and Margaret shook her head in response. "No, when we came to our senses, the first thing we saw was Luffy and Nami smiling at us." Margaret hadn't even realized she had called the Straw Hat Captain by his name, instead recalling what had happened since she woke up. "Man, what a relief, huh?" A loud voice shouted with joy right next to her ear, making Margaret flinch. And from the sound of it, someone else beside her as well. "Luffy, give them some space." Another voice called, familiar to Margaret. Her vision gradually cleared as she gazed at the two intruders in front of her, both with large smiles as the man took a few steps back. "It seems you two are back to normal," Nami continued, and Margaret was almost taken aback by the relief and warmth in her tone, the orange-haired woman beaming at something just beside Margaret. The blonde-haired woman turned her head to see none other than Kiku, who, for perhaps the first time, seemed gobsmacked, given the way her jaw slightly hung open. Margaret had never seen her express herself like that. Before she could even greet her friend, it was Luffy who grabbed her attention once again. "I was afraid you two might have died." His announcement came as he wiped sweat from his brow, and Margaret took that moment to look around the arena, noting the empty seats. Hadn't there been something going on? It's good to see you two alive." As Luffy chattered away, beaming brightly at her, Margaret watched as the orange-haired girl lunged toward Kikyu. Both women were too dazed to react, but they still registered it as a threa. Shock overtook them once again as Nami wrapped her arms around Kikyu's neck, nearly strangling her in an embrace. Kikyu, understandably, was gobsmacked, her arms lax at her sides as she couldn't even comprehend what was happening. "Kikyu, thank you." Nami's voice wavered, and Margaret might have blamed her mental state for what she thought was the sight and sound of tears in Nami's eyes. "I was so worried about you, I'm glad you're alive." The orange-haired woman seemed to regain her composure, taking a step back to bashfully clear her throat. Both Kikyu and Margaret stared at her in confusion and perhaps a bit of awe, as Luffy fondly chuckled at the exchange before turning to look at a retreating white cape accompanied by the sound of clicking heels. "Hey you, thanks," his call snapped Margaret and Kikyu from their stunned silence as they watched the retreating figure seemingly shudder at the gratitude displayed. Or perhaps it was the man's attitude toward their snake princess that had caused suck. The snake princess? Margaret and Kikyu both fell to their knees in a low bow, and given the way their ruler had stopped, it seemed they had vocalized her title aloud. Margaret stuttered, unsure of what to say, while Kikyu remained silent in utter respect. Hancock, thankfully, took the initiative, sparing them from their embarrassment as she gazed at the two from the corner of her eye. "Please, continue to protect our island and its people." Her voice was soft and angelic before she continued to her throne. Marigold and Sandersonia both smiled at the two city defenders before turning to face their sister. "And that's what happened," Margaret finished with a simple shrug, Neri nodding along with a happy smile. "Thank God." Her exclamation was met with murmurs of agreement from the crowd. "It seems the petrification procedure caused some amnesia, if that's all you two remember. I can fill in the blanks later, if you want." Aphilandrid timidly cut in, evidently still shaken by the emotional roller coaster she'd been on. "Margaret." The voice came from someone at the back of the crowd, as if they were heckling a prestigious event. "What about the man? What happened to him?" The crowd now seemed interested, leaning in toward the source of their previous discussion. "Yes, Rindo has a point. Did the snake princess turn him and his witch into stone for their insolence?" The group seemed eager for an answer, despite the fact that by all their rules and rights, the two pirates were technically innocent under the law of execution. Perhaps a certain black-haired woman at the fringe of the crowd picked up on that thought. Regardless, before Margaret could answer, the silent Kikyu finally graced the crowd with her words. "No, she did not. The snake princess invited Nami and the man into the palace." Pure and utter silence followed, but it didn't last long. WWWHHHAAATTT. There had been many awkward meetings throughout history. Mahmudin, the great hero of Ultia, meeting his wife on the battlefield after long suspecting her dead, or, as Vivi had once told her, when Kahira, the conqueror of Alabasta, met the aphrodisiac-obsessed king of the desert. Countless moments in the world's timeline would cause one to cringe upon learning of them. Nami was sure that if their crew made it into the history books, which they would, after all, Luffy was going to be the pirate king, this meeting would rank up there. Nami sat cross-legged on the floor next to her captain, who beamed while rocking on his behind to let out some energy, sitting next to the two giant snake sisters who had only tried to execute them moments ago. The four sat in silence, though it was most definitely an awkward one, but Nami doubted Luffy saw it that way. He was likely thinking about eating and kept glancing at Marigold to his right, as if expecting her to serve them a 5-course meal. She shook her head fondly. No such luck. She suspected their purpose here was far more business-related, though Nami had to admit she had no idea what that business was. Still, she couldn't help but keep track of where the Snake Sisters were at all times. Was this how Zoro had been around Robin when she had joined? Anxious and ready to fight at a moment's notice. She had been swayed by treasure, something she had no qualms admitting. And while she had kept an eye on Robin for some time after, she never felt she might have to take up arms at any moment. This whole situation gave her a bad feeling, and her Klima tacked at her side itched as if it were on fire. And yet, it seemed the four of them were supposedly friends now. At least, that's how Nami interpreted the gratitude that had been thrown their way for the last 10 minutes. But that was Luffy's secret power, and this she knew. Some on the crew knew it better than others, she and Zoro especially, having watched the effect their captain had on people time and time again. Hell, he had that effect on them too. Nami glanced at Luffy from the corner of her eye, a small smile gracing her features. He was a black hole of a person, with the way he drew all in. That's what Zoro used to say. Nami would always laugh at that, disagreeing with a strange look in her eye when the two engaged in their drinking competitions. Luffy wasn't a black hole, far from it. He was a star, the sun at the center of the solar system. He drew everything in but allowed them just enough freedom to carve their own paths, lighting the way as he did. Zoro used to laugh at her for that, but Nami knew him well enough to tell he actually agreed. So, what's happening now? Is this some kind of after-battle feast? Luffy broke the silence with his impatience, shuffling around on the floor, trying to find the most comfortable way to sit. Nami watched his lips grow wet with gluttony, and a feeling of annoyance crawled up her throat. His stomach was going to be the death of her one day. In that case, I'll definitely join you in your celebration, Luffy continued, eliciting a sigh from his navigator as his imagination took hold, his mouth running with endless questions, unrelenting under the Snake Sisters' stares. What's the specialty here? Is it a type of meat? Please tell me it's a type of meat. Oh, I bet it is. It is, isn't it? I bet it's going to be tasty. Okay, that was enough. Nami interrupted his rant with a swift fist to his head, sending him spiraling to the ground and eliciting a cry from the Straw Hat Captain. Nami had a terrible feeling she was going to be doing this for the rest of her life. Luffy, you're drooling all over the carpet. Can't you try to be sophisticated for once in your life? Huh? Why would I want to be suffocated? His outcry was met with Nami grabbing him by the lapels of his vest, shaking him back and forth as she lost herself in her frustration. I said sophisticated, not suffocated, you moron. I would suffocate you right here if I didn't think it would cause you more brain damage, idiot. Honestly, why'd I put up with you half the time? Her shaking accelerated along with the speed of her speech, Luffy's eyes growing dizzy as he tried to dissuade his navigator from shaking him further with a weak whine. Sandersonia and Marigold laughed, causing Nami to turn to them with a confused expression, curious like a cat. She released Luffy, who fell to the floor with cuckoos and clouds floating above his head, his eyes spinning. You two are quite strange, aren't you? Sandersonia had a soft smile on her face, a stark contrast to the cruel smirk she had displayed back at the arena. Still, her pride wouldn't allow her to make a bad impression, and she pointed down at her dazed captain with a lazy finger, though she didn't look away from the Snake Sister. Oh please, he's the only strange one here. Perhaps her words would have held more weight if not for the banter she had displayed with her captain earlier. Sandersonia and Marigold merely closed their eyes with a pleasant hum, smiling at the endearing nature of the two pirates. Please, do not take it as an insult, Marigold reassured, staring down a head so vehemently targeted earlier. It's just that we've never seen a person so kind and so unrefined. At that, Luffy sat up, picking his nose as a perplexed expression crossed his face. Unrefined? It seemed Marigold's statement warranted an explanation, but before she could answer, Nami interrupted before Luffy could steer them away from an important discussion. So, what's going to happen now? After all, they didn't actually know if they were going to be punished further or not. Though only one of them really cared, Nami thought, casting a side eye at the vacant expression of the man she had pledged her life to. Sandersonia shrugged. She didn't seem too fussed with the situation, that much was evident. I'm unsure. However, all I care about is that we can show our gratitude for the kindness you've both shown us. Luffy, it seemed, was not pleased with this answer, a frown crossing his face in a petulant manner. Huh? You don't have to do that. Besides, I can't eat gratitude or… A fist to the arm interrupted him. We're glad nothing happened to either of you, but as we stated earlier, Luffy and I need to get moving. We have to reunite with our friends. She thought her reasoning might reach them, but the Snake Sisters merely laughed, rebuffing the deflection. You two really don't understand what you have done for us, do you? Marigold's smile was wide and full of emotion, so different from the one she had sported at the arena. If anyone saw the mark on our back, we would no longer be able to stay in this country. There would be nowhere for us to go. That's why your kindness has affected us so much. We are extremely grateful to you, man. And to you, Weather Witch, for keeping our secret. The two lowered their heads in bows of what seemed like fealty, an act that seemed practically sacrilegious, but Luffy dismissed it instantly with a shake of his head, as if it were a simple matter. To him, it was. Come on, don't be silly. That mark on your back had nothing to do with our fight. And hey, one little rash can't be that bad, right? Nami stared at him, sensing there was more to the situation. She couldn't quite piece it all together, but she had enough insight to glance at her own tattoo with a frown. Lo and behold, an interrupting voice provided Nami with the information she was missing. Perhaps it is better if we show you. The voice called from behind the curtain, and Nami recognized it as belonging to the Snake Princess. The two pirates blinked, turning toward the source of the voice in unison. Come, man, I do not have time to waste on this. Her voice was impatient, with an edge that made Nami wince in sympathy, though she wasn't sure she should be feeling that. Luffy turned to her hesitantly, as if asking for permission to stand, and Nami stared at him in slight surprise. Oh, now he was deferring to her. Too little, too late. Still, the roll of her eyes indicated to Luffy that he could go ahead. The raven-haired teen stood slowly, and after a small pause, stepped toward the curtain. You mean, you want me to open this thing? His question elicited a frustrated, yes, from Hancock. And even Luffy could tell there was an anxiety to the situation that should probably make him just get on with it. And with that, he pulled back the curtain, the sight behind it immediately eliciting a blush from Nami. Nami knew she was beautiful, and that knowledge often served to her advantage. But she had to admit, the naked Hancock before her was stunning. The vulnerable look on Hancock's face instantly ushered such thoughts from Nami's mind, and the navigator frowned. Her captain's dumbfounded stare also caught her attention. Nami could practically hear the cogs turning in his head as he observed the warlord and pieced together what was missing. She knew the idiot would figure it out in a second. Hey, why are you naked? Nami wasn't particularly surprised by Luffy's lack of reaction. Not once in the years she'd known him had Luffy ever shown interest in the female form. His mind was too focused on the future and adventure to recognize the significance of it. Nami's subconscious fought itself, drowning out a traitorous thought that contradicted her theory, and the navigator thought nothing more of it. That said, Hancock seemed somewhat displeased by the reaction. I see you are still as impudent as ever. Sandersonia and Marigold stared at Hancock in confusion, wondering why they sensed disappointment from their sister. They knew her well enough to read the subtle micro-expressions on her face, like the small twitch of her lips that couldn't decide whether to smile or frown. Nami stared at the woman, deadpan. Could she not just get on with it? She and Luffy didn't really need to see this, especially if there wasn't a point or money to be made. An annoyed storm whipped through her mind, but she quelled it out of respect for the mess they had found themselves in. No matter, Hancock continued, grabbing her neck as if preparing to brush her hair aside. Nami waited in anticipation but paused when she saw Hancock quivering. Her whole body shook as her eyes squeezed shut, and the navigator frowned in instant sympathy. What was going on? She had seen similar reactions in both herself and Nijiko over the years after Belmere died. What demons was Hancock seeing whenever she shut her eyes? Salome shifted to turn Hancock's back toward them, and the small nudge the snake gave its mistress as a display of comfort spoke volumes. Still, Hancock shook, but she had seemingly found the strength to speak. The mark, on my back. Why, you said, you had seen it before? I need to know. The desperation in her voice was readily apparent to all in the room. Take a closer look. With that, Hancock brushed her hair aside in a quick movement, desperately trying to push herself over the line. The circle with 3 triangles above and 1 below finally revealed itself. Now, in steady light and not surrounded by steam, Nami could see it for what it was. This was no tattoo or rash. This was a brand. Nami winced, holding back a gasp as she stared at the design permanently etched into the warlord's pale skin. Though neither Nami nor Luffy had seen the design before, both found it strangely familiar. They remained silent, trying to figure out their feelings of déjà vu, while Hancock struggled to keep her back exposed for so long. Where have you seen it? Are you aware of what this mark means? Luffy didn't reply, cupping his hand under his chin as he thought harder than he usually did, genuinely trying to relieve Hancock of whatever pain she was feeling. But the captain just couldn't put his finger on it. Why did it look so familiar? Answer me. Hurry up. Nami turned to the Snake Sisters with a frown as Hancock grew more frustrated and appeared to be in pain. Sandersonia had practically collapsed inward on herself. This is not pleasant for any of us. For once, it seemed Luffy had figured it out before Nami. He perked up as Hancock covered the mark with her hair again. Oh. Hancock glared at the captain, irritated by his refusal to elaborate. Oh what? It's not the same one I was thinking of. Luffy turned to Nami with a thoughtful expression, clearly seeking the navigator's confirmation. Hey Nami, didn't Hachi have a symbol like that on his forehead? That opened the floodgates in Nami's memory, and her eyes widened as she recalled her own past. Luffy was right. Hachi did have that mark. And not just Hachi, but he's right. Most of the fishmen I've met have had that sun mark somewhere on their bodies. At least, most of Arlong's crew did. The mention of that name was enough to make Luffy frown, causing him to briefly withdraw from the conversation, allowing Hancock to interject. Hey, fishman. Arlong. Now, it was Hancock who was curious about someone else's past. The Snake Princess stared at the navigator, who clearly had no intention of giving her a response. Still, Hancock's curiosity was clear on her face, and her tone demanded answers. Who was this orange-haired woman, and what was here of the sea? Before she could demand answers more forcefully, a voice spoke up from behind the group, interrupting their internal monologues. If he does not know, then we should yell him. Nami, Sandersonia, and Marigold all turned to see the small, elderly woman behind them, while Luffy tilted his head at the old prune's presence, likely wondering who she was. Elder Nyan, the Snake Sisters chorused, but Hancock didn't join them, instead glaring at the wrinkled woman in utter rage. How dare you show your face here once again? Her yell was met with a solemn expression from the elder, who didn't falter in the face of the warlord's anger. Be honest, Snake Princess. The determination that Elder Nyan always seemed to have despite her age was something Nami was growing to appreciate, and she threw a fond smile the old woman's way. You have already seen what a big heart this man has. At that, Hancock softened, her bottom lip quivering. Elder Nyan approached with a sympathetic and motherly air to her presence. It's all right, my child. Your secret is safe with these two good-hearted people. They both need to know the truth behind what's caused them nothing but trouble today. Elder Nyan had now approached close enough to look both Luffy and Nami in the eyes. You two, I'm not mistaken in assuming you're the notorious pirates, Straw Hat, Luffy and Cat Burglar, Nami, am I? The pirates nodded in confirmation, Luffy tilting his head to the side like a curious puppy. How do you know who we are, Snake Granny? Nyan merely chuckled at his confusion and the nickname he'd given her, taking a seat beside Nami. You've caused such an uproar, anyone would meow. The snake that formed her staff uncoiled, handing a newspaper to a confused Nami. Please read this, my dear, Nyan requested, and Nami nodded, opening the newspaper with a curious expression. The World Economy newspaper wasn't always the most reliable, in Nami's opinion, but it was the most widespread, able to pick up news that otherwise went unnoticed. Besides, it was the only paper one could reliably receive at sea. She scanned the front page and, upon seeing the main article, her eyes widened. Nami quickly scanned the words, and upon finding no indication that any of the crew had been harmed or captured, let out a sigh of relief. Luffy looked at her with a puzzled yet calm expression, and Nami began to read the article aloud. Terror on Sabaody Archipelago. Pirate, Straw Hat, Luffy attacks the world nobles. Nami paused for a moment, long enough to register the gasps of the three Snake Sisters before she continued. Yesterday, a peaceful afternoon at the Sabaody Archipelago turned into a horrific nightmare for all. At approximately 2:30, Saint Roseward and his family were violently assaulted while engaging in peaceful commerce at the Public Employment Security Office. It was three pirates who led this terror attack: Surgeon of Death, Trafalgar Law, Captain Eustace Kidd, and the man who appears to have been the ringleader, Straw Hat, Monkey D. Luffy. Straw Hat Luffy assaulted Saint Charlos after an incident involving gunfire, and when Saint Roseward attempted to defend his son, he was assaulted as well. Straw Hat, while tearing through innocents at the security office, encountered a snag in his vicious plan when Saint Shauria called upon the Navy Admiralty to punish the criminals. Although Saint Shauria was attacked with minimal harm to her person, Both Saint Roseward and Saint Charlos are alive but in critical condition. It was only recently that Straw Hat Luffy attacked the heart of the world government, Enies Lobby, laying the island to waste. As such, with these crimes in mind and his violent attack on the world nobles, Admiral Kizaru was deployed to the archipelago to quell the terror attack. But it seems Straw Hat Luffy and his crew have gone missing and remain at large, along with the other 2 pirates who assisted in the assault. Is a new pirate alliance in the works? Where will Monkey D. Luffy strike next? Read more on page 7. Nami finished with a frown. There were some inaccuracies in the story, the embellishment of their crimes similar to the Enies Lobby report. Still, Nami didn't particularly care, aside from her annoyance at the lack of journalistic integrity. She looked up at the others, all of whom shared the same awestruck expression as they stared at the 2 pirates. Especially the raven-haired captain. Luffy lazily picked his nose, not noticing and likely not caring, as he stared off into space. And miraculously, as the paper said, in 3 days' time, he escaped some of the most dangerous marines that the Central Authority has to offer, landing on our distant island with his navigator. Luffy sprang from his seat at Nyan's words, looking at her with an exasperated expression. It's like we've been telling you guys. We were fighting this Paw guy and then he just sent us flying here. His explanation was met with cynical looks from the group, and Nami felt the need to step in. He's right, I tried to explain this before. We were attacked by Bartholomew Kuma, and he used his power to send us here. Nami looked at the still shocked Hancock with a slightly annoyed expression, thinking the woman would have understood if Nami had been allowed to finish her explanation back at the arena. Hancock nodded slightly, evidently knowing enough about her colleague to verify their story. Still, the Snake Princess was more focused on the Straw Hat Captain. "So, you attacked one of the celestial dragons?" she asked, as if she still couldn't believe it, resulting in a scowl from Luffy as he nodded vigorously. "I don't regret it either, I only hit one of them in the face cause he was being a jerk. I think Usopp landed on the other one." Hancock remained silent, her eyes locked onto Luffy, mouth agape at his confirmatory response. He had actually struck a celestial dragon? It didn't make sense, yet it seemed to answer every question she had about the man's presence here. "So," she managed to say, everyone in the room turning to look at her. "Another fool like him still exists in this world." Tears began to fall now, a small sniffle escaping her lips before Hancock shielded her eyes with a shaky hand. Luffy blinked in confusion before sitting down next to his navigator, moving away from the bed to give Hancock some space. Someone who will defy the heavens with no regard for his own life, just like he did. Luffy asked cautiously. He had no idea what she was talking about, and now she was crying. He didn't really know how to respond to that. What did you do when girls cried anyway? Nami, meanwhile, regarded Hancock with a neutral expression. She doubted the Empress wanted sympathy, though Nami had plenty of it. Still, Nami felt the need to comfort both Hancock and her sisters, given how they had practically shrunk away. Eventually, Hancock sighed, having stifled her sobs enough to continue. "I shall tell you the truth then." Hancock reached behind her, grabbed her raven locks, and with more confidence than before, though not much, pushed her hair aside to reveal the symbol on her back. A cold chill languidly crawled its way up her spine. "This symbol you see, it's the hoof of the soaring dragon. The crest of the world nobles." Nami just stared, with far more realization than her captain beside her, the pieces beginning to fall into place. "No, it is burned into the flesh of those who have been bought by the celestial dragons. A symbol that will never disappear, forever marking the bearer as less than human. As mere property." Hancock once again stifled her sobs as Salome draped a red cloak around her shoulders to preserve her dignity. It let out a sad hiss, and Hancock almost leaned into the snake for comfort. Nami's mind raced, the tattoo on her shoulder burning as she stared at the warlord. After faltering, Hancock spoke with a shuddering breath. "We 3 sisters, we were." The breath almost overcame her, nearly reducing her to collapse. "But Hancock, strong as Champoger. We were once slaves to the world nobles." Both Luffy's and Nami's eyes widened. Nami had figured it out as soon as Hancock revealed who the crest belonged to, but hearing the words spoken aloud was something else entirely. She could only imagine what the 3 sisters must be going through. Nami's scar burned. Perhaps she could imagine. It happened when we were 12 years old. At that, Nami felt tears well up in her eyes, a sudden need to comfort the sisters rising within her despite their actions against her. Children, they had only been children, innocent and unbroken. Nami's hand rose to her mouth to stifle her grief, not wanting to show more emotion on their behalf than was appropriate. She didn't know how Hancock would react to sympathy on that scale, especially from her. We were abducted from a ship returning home to our land. New Kuja pirates, foolish enough to believe ourselves invincible. The slavers proved otherwise, and they took us to be sold into the hands of the world nobles. Hancock gripped her arm tightly, perhaps so tight she might have drawn blood. Everything after that is something I do not wish to remember, Hancock groaned, the memories returning regardless.